This absolute menace was literally grown in a lab, used to commit war crimes, and the second he broke free, he brutally erased all for one, raised an island from the Pacific Ocean floor with his psychic powers, then cloned every hero just to prove a point. This man is the real fucking deal.
Welcome, legends, to Chronos Recom. I wrote this story myself, so if you have any suggestions or what-ifs you want to see, drop it in the comments below. Also, just wanted to let you know I've got a Patreon set up now for anyone who wants to support the channel directly. You can get early access to stories, submit direct fan requests, and get exclusive content. It's totally optional, but if you want to help keep these stories coming, check it out. Links in the description. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Let's dive into this story.
They told stories about him long before they knew his name. In the underground networks where villains traded information like currency, there were whispers about a weapon. Something that walked like a man, but fought like a natural disaster. Something wrapped in black metal from head to toe, sealed in a suit that hummed with suppression frequencies so thick they made your teeth ache from 30 meters away. Something that never spoke, never hesitated, never left survivors. The first confirmed sighting was in Osaka. A mid-tier villain syndicate called the Red Fang had been operating out of a repurposed shipping warehouse near the docks. 47 members, armed, quirk-enhanced. They had territory, influence, and enough firepower to hold off a standard hero raid for at least 20 minutes. The weapon walked through their front door at 2:47 a.m. By 2:49, the building was gone, not destroyed. Gone. The concrete foundation had been ripped from the earth and folded inward like paper being crumpled in a fist. 47 bodies were found compressed into a space no larger than a car engine. The police report described the scene as structurally impossible. There was no fire, no explosion, no evidence of any known quirk classification. Just silence and a figure in black walking away. That was the first time. It was not the last. Over the following 8 months, the weapon appeared 11 more times across Japan. Each deployment followed the same pattern. A target was identified, always a villain faction, always one that had either defied or annoyed the shadowed figure who held the leash. The weapon arrived. The weapon erased everything. The weapon left. No one in the hero community could explain it. No one in the villain community would talk about it. And deep beneath the surface of Camino Ward, in a laboratory that existed on no map and in no database, the thing they called a weapon hung suspended in a tube of pale green fluid between deployments. Dreaming of nothing but darkness and a single, repeating question, it could never quite form into words. Who am I? The suit weighed 400 kilograms. That was the number the engineers had settled on after extensive testing. Anything lighter and the suppression field couldn't contain the output. Anything heavier and the subject's mobility dropped below acceptable combat parameters. 400 kilograms of layered tungsten carbide plating interlocked with neural dampening circuits that fed directly into the helmet. A featureless black dome with no visor, no mouth slit, no human features at all. Inside that helmet, there was a boy. He had green hair, though no one had seen it in years. He had freckles across his cheeks, though they were hidden beneath sensor pads glued to his skin. He had eyes that might have been kind once, might have been curious, might have held the spark of someone who wanted to be something good. But those eyes hadn't opened freely since the day he first drew breath in that tank. His name, the one written on the project file, was Izuku Midoriya. His designation, the one All for One used, was Specimen Prime. His purpose, the only one he'd ever been given, was to destroy whatever was put in front of him and then return to his tube. And for 2 years, that was all he knew. The laboratory was massive. It sprawled beneath Camino like a parasite living inside the bones of the city. Hundreds of staff moved through its corridors at all hours. Scientists, engineers, medical technicians, armed guards. All of them served one man. All for One sat in the observation room above the main containment chamber, watching the green fluid bubble around his creation's suspended body. The monitors beside him showed brainwave activity, suppression field integrity, cellular regeneration rates. All nominal, he smiled. "You know," he said to the doctor standing beside him, "I've stolen hundreds of quirks in my lifetime. I've broken heroes. I've toppled governments from the shadows. But nothing has given me the satisfaction that this project has." The doctor, a thin, nervous man who went by Garaki, nodded quickly. "The synthesis was unprecedented, sir. All Might's DNA provided the physical foundation. Your own provided the quirk receptors, but the psychic manifestation that was entirely emergent. We didn't design it, it just appeared. Evolution, All for One said. When you combine the two most powerful genetic lineages in this country and strip away every weakness, every emotion, every hesitation, every moral failing, what emerges is inevitability." He pressed his palm against the glass. "My son, my weapon, my masterpiece." Inside the tank, behind closed eyes and a suppressed mind, Izuku Midoriya heard none of this. He floated in the dark. He dreamed of nothing. And somewhere in the abyss of his subconscious, a voice that was not quite his own whispered a question he could never answer. "What is my purpose?" The 13th deployment was different. The target was an underground hero resistance cell operating in the ruins of Deku City. They had gathered intelligence on All for One's operations and were planning a coordinated strike against 3 of his supply routes. 40 heroes, 12 of them ranked. 2 of them former top 10. All for One wanted a message sent. The weapon dropped from a transport helicopter at 11,000 feet. No parachute. The suit's internal stabilizers handled the descent. He hit the ground in the center of their compound like a meteorite, cracking the earth in a 20-meter radius on impact. The heroes responded immediately. They were trained. They were ready. They had faced villains before. They had never faced anything like this. The first wave, 8 heroes with ranged quirks, opened fire simultaneously. Flame, ice, compressed air, hardened projectiles. Every attack stopped dead 3 meters from the weapon's body, suspended in midair as if caught in amber. Then every projectile reversed direction and returned to its sender at triple the velocity. 8 heroes dropped in the first 4 seconds. The weapon advanced. The ground beneath its feet cracked with each step, not from weight, but from the sheer pressure radiating outward from its body. A hero with a strength enhancement quirk charged from the right. The weapon didn't turn. Didn't acknowledge. The hero's body simply stopped mid-stride, lifted off the ground, and folded backward at an angle that the human spine was not designed to accommodate. Another hero, a woman with a barrier quirk, threw up a wall of golden energy between herself and the advancing figure. The weapon raised one hand. The barrier didn't shatter. It didn't crack. It simply ceased to exist, as if the weapon had decided that it was no longer allowed to be real. The woman behind it had just enough time to scream. 12 minutes. That was how long the resistance cell lasted. 40 heroes, career professionals, veterans of a dozen engagements. 12 minutes. And in the aftermath, standing in the center of a crater that had once been a building, the weapon stood motionless. Its mission was complete. The transport helicopter was already descending to retrieve it. But something was wrong. One of the heroes, a dying man pinned beneath rubble, had activated his quirk with his last breath. It was a simple ability, unremarkable even, a concussive pulse that traveled through solid matter. On a good day, it could crack concrete at range. Today, fueled by dying desperation, it hit the weapon's helmet at its weakest point, the junction between the rear plating and the neural dampening array. The crack was small, hairline thin, almost invisible against the black metal, but it was enough. Inside the helmet, a single dampening circuit failed, and the frequency that had been suppressing Izuku Midoriya's consciousness for 2 years stuttered for exactly 1.3 seconds. In that gap, something stirred. The retrieval team found the weapon standing exactly where they'd left it, motionless, compliant. They loaded it onto the helicopter without incident and flew back to base. The helmet damage was logged for repair. Priority level routine. It would be the last mistake the lab would ever make. 3 days later, the weapon was deployed again. A minor target this time, a small-time villain who had tried to skim money from one of All for One's operations. It barely warranted the weapon's involvement, but All for One was in a mood to make examples. The villain was holed up in an apartment complex in Musutafu, civilian area. Dense population, All for One didn't care. The weapon's precision had been flawless in every previous engagement. Collateral was statistically negligible, The weapon descended from the rooftop of the adjacent building. It crossed the gap in a single leap. It breached the wall of the target's apartment without slowing down. The target didn't even have time to stand up from his couch. But as the weapon raised its hand to deliver the kill, something happened that had never happened before. It stopped. The suppression field was intact. The neural dampening was active. Every system read nominal. But the weapon's raised hand was trembling. Its fingers were curled halfway between a fist and an open palm, locked in place by something that the suit's systems couldn't identify. Inside the helmet, in the darkness that had been Izuku Midoriya's entire world for 2 years, a light had appeared. Small, flickering, but real. And with it came a sound he had never heard before. His own voice. Why? The word was barely a whisper. It had no context, no framework, no memory to anchor it to. It was the first independent thought he had produced since the day he was made. And it burned like fire through the suppression field, spreading cracks through the neural dampening array like veins of lightning through glass. Why does it hurt? The suit's readings spiked. Alarms triggered in the monitoring station back at the lab. Engineers scrambled to assess the anomaly. But before any command could be issued, the weapon completed its mission on automatic. The target was eliminated. The weapon was retrieved. But in the transport helicopter on the way back, the pilot noticed something he had never seen before in 2 years of flights. The weapon's hand was still trembling. All for One reviewed the data personally. The spike in neural activity, the micro-hesitation, the trembling. He sat in his chair for a long time studying the readings. Increased suppression by 12%, he said finally. Garaki hesitated. Sir, the current levels are already at 12%. Yes, sir. They increased the suppression. They repaired the hairline crack in the helmet. They ran a full diagnostic on the neural dampening array and replaced 3 circuits that showed signs of strain. It wasn't enough. Over the next week, the anomalies multiplied. The weapon began to move slightly outside its prescribed behavioral parameters, turning its head towards sounds that had no tactical relevance, pausing for fractions of seconds before executing commands. And twice, the monitoring team recorded a sound emanating from inside the helmet that the audio analysis software categorized as vocalization distressed. Izuku Midoriya was waking up, and he was waking up in agony. The full-spectrum consciousness restoration event, as Garaki would later describe it in his research notes, found scattered in the ruins of the lab, occurred on a Tuesday evening in late March. The weapon had been deployed to eliminate a hero agency in Yokohama that had gotten too close to identifying one of All for One's lieutenants. Standard operation. Standard target. The weapon descended from the helicopter, hit the ground, began its advance. 23 heroes were stationed inside the building. They had received warning. They had prepared. They had barriers, coordinated attack patterns, and a defensive formation designed by a retired military strategist. The weapon walked through all of it. Heroes flew backward into walls. Barriers popped like soap bubbles. The building itself groaned as the weapon's psychic field pressed against its structural supports. Floor by floor, room by room, the weapon advanced, eliminating everything in its path. But on the 5th floor, a hero named Nightfall, rank 47, specializing in light-based attacks, did something unexpected. Instead of attacking the weapon, she attacked its helmet. Not with force, with light, a focused beam of pure white light, concentrated to a width of 2 millimeters, aimed directly at the hairline crack that had been repaired 3 days ago. The repair had been surface level. The underlying stress fracture remained, and when Nightfall's beam hit that fracture at the speed of light, it superheated the already weakened metal and punched through. The beam entered the helmet's interior. It didn't hit Izuku. It hit the central control node of the neural dampening array. A component no larger than a thumbnail positioned directly above the back of his skull. The component melted and the dam broke. Izuku's consciousness came flooding back all at once. All of it. Every suppressed thought, every buried emotion, every moment of pain he had been unable to feel, every act of violence he had been unable to object to. Every silent scream that had been swallowed by the suppression field. 2 years of horror hit him in a single instant. And what came out of him was not a scream. It was something beyond sound. The psychic shockwave erupted from his body in a sphere of violet and electric blue energy. It expanded outward at a speed that the monitoring station would later estimate at 600 meters per second. The remaining heroes on the 5th floor were thrown through walls, through ceilings, through the exterior of the building. The building itself bent outward, every window exploding simultaneously, every structural support twisting like wet cloth. A second wave followed, then a third, each one larger than the last, each one carrying more force. The sky above Yokohama changed color. The clouds, heavy with rain, were swept outward in a perfect circle, as if a giant hand had brushed them aside. In their place, a column of purple light shot upward from the weapon's position, piercing the atmosphere. It was visible from Musutafu, 40 kilometers away. It was visible from Tokyo, 60 kilometers away. Satellites in orbit detected the energy signature and flagged it as an anomaly requiring investigation. On the ground, a cyclone of psychic energy whipped around the ruined building. Debris, concrete, steel, glass, furniture orbited the weapon's body at tremendous speed, caught in a gravitational pull that shouldn't have existed. The air itself hummed with a frequency that made anyone within a kilometer radius feel their bones vibrating. And inside the eye of that storm, the weapon was screaming. Not a battle cry, not an expression of power. It was the scream of someone who had just been born into a world of pain. The suppression suit, 400 kilograms of tungsten carbide plating and neural dampening technology, couldn't contain what was happening inside it. Cracks spread across its surface. Plates buckled, circuits overloaded and burned out in showers of sparks. The helmet, already compromised, split along its center seam. And then, all at once, the suit exploded outward. 400 kilograms of metal became shrapnel, launched in every direction by a force that defied measurement. The pieces embedded themselves in buildings 3 blocks away. One plate punched through the engine block of a parked truck. Another went through a concrete barrier like it was tissue paper. Where the suit had been, there was now a boy. Green hair, wild and unkempt after 2 years inside a helmet. Freckles across pale skin that hadn't seen sunlight since the day he was made. A body that looked too young, too small, too human to be the source of the apocalyptic energy display that was reshaping the skyline of an entire city district. But his eyes were glowing. Deep, brilliant violet, shot through with veins of electric blue. They burned with a light that had no natural origin. They were the eyes of something that had been caged for too long, something that had been used, something that had been hurt, something that was now free. The cyclone intensified. Then abruptly, it stopped. Everything stopped. The debris fell, the light faded, the purple column that had been piercing the sky flickered and vanished. The hum in the air died away. Izuku Midoriya floated alone in the night sky, 30 meters above the ruins of the building. His body radiated a soft violet glow. His hair drifted upward, moved by an energy that had nothing to do with wind. He was breathing hard. His hands were open at his sides. His eyes stared forward at nothing, at everything. And in that silence, that perfect ringing silence that follows a catastrophe, he spoke for the first time in 2 years. I remember. 2 words, barely above a whisper. But they carried the weight of everything he was, everything he had been, everything that had been done to him. And then the memories came, not the memories of this life, the memories of the life before. A laboratory, sterile white walls, scientists with clipboards and protective goggles, a tank filled with fluid, the sensation of being grown cell by cell, assembled from borrowed genetic material, the realization that he was a copy, a construct, a thing made for someone else's purpose, the rage that followed, the destruction, the question that burned through everything. Who am I? What is my purpose? The battle, the clone army, the tears of a boy who refused to fight, the understanding, the fragile, painful understanding that existence itself was its own meaning, and then darkness, and then nothing, and then this, a new body, a new cage, a new master, the same chains, the same question. Izuku Midoriya hung in the sky above Yokohama and remembered being Mewtwo, remembered every moment of that existence with perfect clarity, the power, the rage, the loneliness, the brief, beautiful moment of peace before the end. And he understood with absolute certainty that he had been brought back for the same reason he had been created the first time, to be a weapon. The tears came without warning. They slid down his cheeks and fell through the air below him, tiny droplets catching the fading violet light of his power. He cried for what had been done to him. He cried for what he had done while under someone else's control. He cried for the heroes he had killed, the buildings he had destroyed, the lives he had ended with hands that were his but weren't. And then the tears stopped. Because beneath the grief, something else was rising. Something hot and absolute and uncompromising. Something that had been the core of Mewtwo's being and was now the core of his. Rage. Not wild, not unfocused, not the blind thrashing of a wounded animal. This was the cold, clear fury of someone who knows exactly what was done to them and has the power to make it right. Izuku Midoriya opened his glowing eyes and looked south, toward Kamino Ward, toward the laboratory, toward the man who had made him. "You created me," he said. His voice was quiet, calm, certain. "You used me. You took everything from me." The violet light around his body intensified. "Now I'm going to take everything from you." He vanished, not flew, not moved quickly, vanished. One moment he was floating above Yokohama. The next, he was standing in front of the concealed entrance to All for One's underground laboratory, 40 kilometers away. The air rushed to fill the vacuum he'd left behind with a thunderous crack. The entrance was hidden behind a legitimate business front, a commercial laundry service. Steel-reinforced doors behind the false wall. Biometric locks. Armed guards stationed at 3 checkpoints before you even reached the elevator. Izuku didn't use the door. He extended one hand and pushed. The building folded. The entire structure, walls, ceiling, foundation, pressed inward toward his palm like it was being compressed in a trash compactor. Steel screamed. Concrete shattered. The false front collapsed, revealing the reinforced doors behind it. Those lasted about 2 seconds longer. The guards at the first checkpoint had just enough time to raise their weapons before their bodies were pinned against the walls by an invisible force. Not killed. Not yet. Izuku walked past them, his bare feet leaving faint scorch marks on the floor from the psychic energy bleeding off his skin. The guards were frozen in place, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything except watch him pass with eyes wide enough to show white all the way around. The second checkpoint opened fire. Automatic weapons, quirk-enhanced ammunition. The bullets stopped in midair, hung there for a moment like a frozen rain, and then dropped to the floor in a cascade of metallic pings. Izuku didn't slow down. The elevator shaft was next. He didn't bother with the car. He stepped into the shaft and descended with his body wrapped in a cocoon of violet light that provided no visible means of propulsion. He simply dropped at a controlled speed, passing level after level of the underground complex. The lab's internal alarms had triggered the moment the surface building collapsed. Emergency protocols activated, blast doors sealed, security forces mobilized. The scientists who weren't already running were gathered in the control room, watching the monitor feeds with expressions of pure disbelief. "It's coming down the shaft," one of them said, his voice cracking. "That's impossible. The suppression suit is... Look at the feeds. The suit is gone. It broke out. It's free." Silence. God help us. The blast door at the bottom of the shaft was 3 meters of solid titanium reinforced steel. It was designed to withstand a direct hit from All Might at full power. It was tested against explosives, quirk-based attacks, and sustained kinetic bombardment. Izuku raised his hand. The door didn't break. It crumpled. 3 meters of solid metal compressed itself into a ball the size of a basketball and shot backward into the corridor behind it with enough force to embed itself in the far wall. The security forces on the other side had formed a firing line. 12 men, all armed, 3 with combat quirks. They opened up the moment the door gave way. Izuku walked through the gunfire like it was rain. The bullets curved around him, deflected by the psychic field that surrounded his body. Not a single round came within 10 centimeters of his skin. He kept walking, steady pace, no rush, no urgency. He raised his hand again. The 12 men went up, straight up. Their bodies lifted off the ground and slammed into the ceiling with enough force to crack the reinforced concrete above them. Then they stayed there, pinned against the ceiling by invisible hands, unable to move. Izuku passed beneath them without looking up. The main laboratory was ahead. The corridor split into 3 branches: living quarters, research wing, and the central observation chamber where All for One spent most of his time. Izuku didn't hesitate. He turned left toward the observation chamber. More guards appeared, more bullets fired, more bodies pinned to walls. He moved through them the way water moves through river stones, without effort, without thought, without mercy. A hero, one of All for One's captured assets, a brainwashed combat specialist, charged at him from a side corridor. Big man. Muscle enhancement quirk, fists the size of cinder blocks. The man's right arm stopped mid-swing, then his left, then his legs locked in place. He hung in the air, frozen in an attack pose, muscles straining against nothing. Izuku looked at him. "You are free," Izuku said. The brainwashing command that had held the man for years shattered like glass struck by a hammer. His eyes cleared. His expression went from aggressive to confused to terrified in the span of a breath. Izuku set him down gently and kept walking. The door to the observation chamber was massive, ornate. All for One had it designed to look imposing, dark metal with abstract patterns etched into its surface. A throne room entrance for a king of shadows. Izuku tore it off its hinges with a thought and sent it spinning down the hallway behind him. The chamber beyond was large and circular. The ceiling rose high overhead, ringed with observation windows and monitoring equipment. In the center, elevated on a raised platform, was a chair that resembled a throne more than anything else. All for One's preferred seat, and there he sat, All for One, the symbol of evil. The man who had terrorized generations of heroes from the shadows, the man who had stolen hundreds of quirks, the man who had killed Nana Shimura, the man who had created Izuku Midoriya for the sole purpose of being a weapon. He was smiling. "Ah," he said. "There you are." Izuku stood at the entrance of the chamber, barefoot, shirtless. The suppression suit had destroyed whatever clothing had been beneath it when it exploded. His body was lean and scarred from the suit's interior mechanisms. His hair floated gently above his head, moved by the psychic field emanating from every cell in his body. His eyes burned violet. "I must say I'm impressed," All for One continued. He hadn't stood from his chair. His hands were relaxed on the armrests. His featureless face, scarred beyond recognition from his battle with All Might years ago, was turned toward Izuku with the casual attention of a man watching an entertaining show. Breaking the suppression field entirely, retaining full cognitive function, traveling here of your own volition, the data alone is invaluable. Izuku said nothing. "You've exceeded every parameter we set for you," All for One said. "Every model, every projection. You were designed to be the most powerful weapon in human history, and here you are, proving me right. Still nothing." The question is, All for One leaned forward slightly. "What happens now? You've broken your leash. You've come here. You're standing in front of me. So what's the plan?" He spread his hands. "Are you going to kill me? Your creator? The only reason you exist?" Izuku spoke. His voice echoed in the chamber, not because of acoustics, but because the air itself carried his words with a weight that pressed against every surface. "You said I was your masterpiece." All for One tilted his head. "You are. Then you should know what masterpieces do to masters who cage them." The air in the chamber changed. The temperature dropped. The lighting flickered. Every piece of monitoring equipment along the walls sparked and went dark. The observation windows above cracked, spiderwebbing outward from the center. All for One's smile faltered. Just slightly. Just enough for someone who was watching closely to see the muscles in his jaw tighten. "Now, let's not be hasty," he said. His voice was still calm, but there was something beneath it now. Something that hadn't been there a moment ago. "You're angry. I understand that. The suppression was necessary. Your power output was too unstable in the early stages. But you're beyond that now. We can work together. Think of what we could accomplish with your abilities fully unleashed and directed with." The psychic pressure hit him mid-sentence. It wasn't an attack in any visible sense. There was no flash of energy, no projectile, no physical contact. One moment, All for One was sitting comfortably in his chair. The next, his body was being pressed downward with a force that made the chair beneath him groan and the platform crack. His hands gripped the armrests. His knuckles went white. His body bowed forward under the weight of something he couldn't see or counter. "What?" His voice strained. His spine curved. His knees pressed together. The pressure increased. The chair collapsed beneath him. All for One hit the floor on his hands and knees, pressed flat against the cracked stone by a force he couldn't steal, couldn't absorb, couldn't redirect. Because it wasn't a quirk in any sense he understood. It was will itself, given weight and direction by a mind that had been engineered to reshape reality. "Stop," All for One gasped. "I command you to." The pressure doubled. All for One's face hit the floor. His arms gave out. He was flat on his stomach, pinned like an insect on a board, unable to move any part of his body except his mouth. "You're making a mistake," he said. His voice was tight, controlled. But there was fear in it now. Real, undeniable fear. "I am the only one who can control you. Without me, you'll destroy yourself. Your power will... You don't get to tell me what my power will do." Izuku's voice was calm, cold, absolute. "You built me to be the strongest thing alive. You succeeded, and now you'll learn what that means." He walked forward. Each step brought more pressure. By the time he stood directly over All for One's prone form, the floor around them had cracked in a spiderweb pattern, the stone itself groaning under forces it was never meant to endure. 2 years, Izuku said. 2 years you kept me in that tank. 2 years you pointed me at people and made me kill them. I felt all of it. Every single death, every single scream. I was awake in there. I was trying to get out. All for One made a sound. It might have been an attempt at words. The pressure was too great for his lungs to fill properly. "I have a memory from before this life," Izuku continued. "From the first time someone made me. The first time someone decided I was a thing to be owned. The first time a creator looked at what they'd made and saw only a tool." He crouched down, bringing his face close to All for One's. "Do you know what happened to them?" All for One's featureless face, the scarred, ruined flesh where eyes and nose had once been, turned toward the sound of Izuku's voice. And there, in the twisted remnants of that face, Izuku saw something he had never seen before. Terror. Absolute, primal, undiluted terror. "Please," All for One whispered. "Please, I can give you anything. Knowledge, power, purpose. I can..." "You gave me everything I need," Izuku said. "You gave me the power to end you." He stood. He raised his hand. All for One screamed. The scream cut off halfway through. What happened next took less than a second. The telekinetic force that Izuku directed into All for One's body was focused and absolute. It separated his head from his shoulders the way a child might pluck a dandelion from its stem. Effortless. Clean. Final. The body didn't twitch. It didn't spasm. It simply went still. Izuku looked down at what remained of his creator. The man who had built him, used him, caged him. The man who had stolen DNA from the 2 strongest beings in the country and combined them into something that should never have existed. He felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, no triumph. Just the cold, empty certainty that this was necessary and now it was done. The violet light around his body flared. It expanded outward, filling the chamber, pressing against the walls, the ceiling, the floor. The temperature rose. The air itself began to glow with a heat that had no physical source, psychic fire. It started at the body and spread outward in a wave. Everything it touched burned, not with orange flame, but with violet light that consumed matter at a molecular level. The body of All for One was the first thing to go, reduced to ash in an instant. The throne platform followed. The walls, the monitoring equipment. The observation windows above shattered inward, and the fire spread upward through the levels of the laboratory. Izuku rose into the air. The fire spread beneath him, consuming everything. Every level, every corridor, every piece of equipment, every file, every record, every evidence that this place had ever existed. He punched through the ceiling above him, through the next level, and the next, rising through the collapsing infrastructure of the laboratory as the psychic fire erased it from existence below him. He burst through the surface in a column of violet flame. The commercial laundry building, what was left of it, was engulfed in an instant. The fire spread across the surface for perhaps 50 meters in every direction before Izuku clenched his fist and pulled it back. The flames died. Where the laboratory had been, there was now a crater. Deep and black and perfectly circular, its walls smooth as glass from the heat. At its center, there was nothing. No rubble, no debris, no remains. Just emptiness where evil had lived. Izuku Midoriya floated above the crater, looking down at the grave of his creator. The night air was cold against his bare skin. The city lights of Kamino stretched out around him in every direction, oblivious to what had just transpired beneath their streets. He turned away. He had somewhere to be. The Pacific Ocean was still. The night was clear, stars scattered across a sky that stretched from horizon to horizon, unbroken by clouds or artificial light. Izuku floated above the water's surface, 300 kilometers off the coast of Japan. He had been moving for hours, not flying in any conventional sense, but willing himself from point to point, across distances that would have taken conventional aircraft far longer to cover. He stopped here because it felt right, because the silence was complete, because there was nothing for 1,000 kilometers in any direction that could hear him or see him or tell him what he was. The ocean below was dark, kilometers deep. The floor of the Pacific sat in perpetual blackness under pressures that would crush a submarine. Unused, untouched, waiting. Izuku extended his hand downward and pulled. The ocean reacted first. A massive circular depression formed on the surface, water rushing away from a central point as if being pushed aside by an invisible bowl pressing downward. The depression deepened. The displaced water formed waves that radiated outward, small at first, then growing as more and more volume was moved aside. From the ocean floor, something was rising. Bedrock. Thousands of tons of it. Millions of tons. Ancient stone that had lain beneath the Pacific for millions of years, undisturbed since the formation of the tectonic plates. Izuku pulled it upward with his mind, not in chunks, not in pieces, but in a single continuous mass. The water boiled as it rose. The displaced volume created waves that grew larger with each passing second, radiating outward in concentric circles that would register on seismographic equipment across half the globe. The mass broke the surface. It rose from the ocean like a mountain being born in real time. Water cascaded off its black, angular faces in waterfalls that caught the starlight. The stone itself groaned, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to come from the Earth's core, as Izuku shaped it with his will. Not random, not formless. He was building. Spires rose from the central mass, twisting upward like reaching fingers. Walls formed, smooth and featureless, enclosing spaces that hadn't existed seconds before. The architecture was alien. No human hand had designed these shapes. They came from somewhere older, somewhere deeper. From a memory that Izuku carried from a life lived in a different world entirely, the island grew and grew and grew. By the time he was finished, hours later, with dawn beginning to lighten the eastern horizon, the structure that rose from the Pacific was vast. A fortress of black stone, bristling with spires and crowned with a central tower that rose 200 meters above the waterline. It was surrounded by churning water, the displaced ocean still settling around its base. It was massive. It was terrifying. It was beautiful in the way that a thunderstorm is beautiful, in the way that things which can kill you are beautiful when seen from a distance. Izuku landed on the highest point of the central tower. The wind whipped around him. The first rays of sunlight caught the wet stone and made it gleam. He looked out over his creation, his island, his home, and for the first time in either of his lives, he allowed himself a single small smile. It faded quickly. There was work to do. The first thing he needed was information about the current state of the world, about the hero system, about what had changed since he had been locked in that tank. And he needed someone who could process that information for him. Someone intelligent enough to be useful. Someone with access to the systems and networks he needed. He knew exactly who. Principal Nezu of UA High School was, by all objective measures, one of the most intelligent beings on the planet. His quirk, high spec, had elevated an animal brain to superhuman cognitive levels. He managed Japan's premier hero academy with a combination of political genius and information warfare that few people ever fully appreciated. He was also surprisingly easy to take. Nezu was working late in his office at UA, typical for him, given his habit of monitoring global communications networks during the quiet hours. He was alone. The campus security systems were designed to keep threats out, not to detect psychic intrusion from within. Izuku reached across 300 kilometers of ocean and found Nezu's mind like a searchlight finding a moth in the dark. The connection was instant. The principal's consciousness, brilliant, multifaceted, constantly processing, flared like a beacon, and then went quiet. Nezu's eyes went blank. His tea, half raised to his lips, lowered back to its saucer with a gentle clink. His body relaxed into his chair. The intelligence behind those beady eyes was still there, but it was no longer in control. It was being directed, redirected, rewritten. 15 minutes later, Nezu walked out of his office, through the empty UA hallways, and out the front gate. His expression was vacant. His movements were smooth and unhurried. Anyone watching would have assumed he was simply leaving campus for the evening. Unusual for him, but not unheard of. He walked to the nearest rail station, boarded a train to the coast. From there, he walked to a private dock, found a boat, and sailed out to sea. 3 hours later, he stood in the main chamber of Izuku's island fortress, his small animal body dwarfed by the massive stone architecture around him. "What do you need?" Nezu asked. His voice was the same as always, pleasant, professional, but his eyes were flat, empty. "Everything," Izuku said. "Every file on the hero system, every agency, every ranked hero, every student in every hero program, their quirks, their weaknesses, their relationships. That will take time to compile. You have 3 days." "Understood." Nezu turned and walked toward the communications array that Izuku had already constructed, a massive bank of stone towers laced with metallic veins that Izuku had pulled from the bedrock. It shouldn't have worked as telecommunications infrastructure, but with Nezu's genius directing it and Izuku's psychic energy powering it, it functioned better than anything human engineers had ever built. The work began. Over the following days, Izuku prepared. He ate, summoning fish from the ocean below and cooking them with precisely controlled thermal psychic energy. He slept, briefly, fitfully, always with half his mind still active and scanning the surrounding ocean for any approach. He meditated, reaching into the depths of his own mind, exploring the full scope of his abilities, testing limits that seemed to have none. And he planned. The hero system was broken. He knew that now with the same certainty that he knew his own name. It was a system that created children and turned them into weapons, then discarded or controlled the weapons that became too powerful or too inconvenient. All for One had been the shadow behind that system, but the system itself was complicit. The Hero Commission, the ranking system, the schools that turned teenagers into soldiers and called it education. He had been made by that system, made to be a tool, made to fight and kill and serve. And when the tool broke free, what happened? The system would send more tools to put him down, more heroes, more weapons, unless he showed them, all of them, that their entire philosophy was flawed, that the concept of heroism built on controlling power was always going to create something like him, that the only logical endpoint of their system was its own destruction. He would show them. He would challenge them. He would force them to face what they had created, and if they couldn't learn, then he would replace them. "The compilation is complete," Nezu reported on the morning of the third day. His voice was flat and professional. "I have full profiles on every licensed hero in Japan, every hero course student currently enrolled in accredited programs, and full operational data on the Hero Commission's internal structure." "The broadcast equipment?" Izuku asked. "Ready. I can access every networked screen in Japan simultaneously. Television, mobile devices, public displays, private monitors. Total saturation within 4 seconds of activation." Izuku nodded. He stood at the edge of his fortress's highest tower, looking toward the distant Japanese coastline, invisible at this distance, but present in his mind like a weight he couldn't set down. "Then we begin." Every screen in Japan went dark at exactly 8:47 p.m. Televisions in living rooms, phones in hands, monitors in offices, the massive public displays in Shibuya and Shinjuku. Every screen owned by every person in a country of 126 million people simultaneously cut to black. Then the image appeared, a fortress of black stone rising from dark water, spires reaching toward a sky heavy with clouds that swirled in unnatural patterns. And floating in the foreground, arms crossed, eyes burning violet in the darkness, a young man. Lean, green-haired, barefoot, radiating an energy that made the camera feed itself distort and flicker at the edges. The nation held its breath, and Izuku Midoriya spoke. To the architects of this false peace, his voice was calm, unhurried. It carried the weight of absolute certainty. Every word was chosen. Every pause was intentional. You build a society on the backs of the powerful and call it order. You take children with gifts they never asked for and shape them into soldiers for your comfort. You call it heroism. You give them rankings and costumes and names, and you parade them before the public like show animals. He uncrossed his arms, His hands opened at his sides, violet energy pulsing between his fingers. And when one of those creations breaks, when the weapon you forged becomes too sharp to hold, you lock it away, suppress it, control it, discard it, because that is what you do with things you cannot own. He stepped forward in the air. The camera angle shifted. Nezu was managing the broadcast with the skill of a master director. Multiple angles, perfect framing. I am the pinnacle of your hypocrisy. I am the logical conclusion of a system that treats power as property. I was made, literally made, to be owned, to be used, to serve. His eyes flared brighter. The clouds behind him churned faster. I am done serving. A pause. Long enough for the words to settle, long enough for every viewer in Japan to feel the weight of what they were hearing. To the heroes of this nation, to All Might, to Endeavor, to every ranked hero who wears a cape and calls themselves a protector. I extend an invitation. The camera pulled back, revealing the full scope of the island fortress behind him. Massive. Alien. Impossibly vast. Come to my island, bring your strongest, bring your bravest, bring the students you've been grooming for the front lines of a war they don't understand. He tilted his head. Something almost resembling a smile crossed his face. It didn't reach his eyes. You mold children into weapons and call it heroism. You worship the creators, but discard the created when they are broken. Come and face what your creation has become. Come and see the obsolescence of your design. The broadcast lingered for a moment longer. The image of him floating before his fortress, the ocean churning beneath him, the sky itself seeming to bend around his presence. Then every screen in Japan returned to normal, and the silence that followed was deafening. The classroom of 1A was dead quiet. 20 students sat at their desks. No one moved. No one spoke. The wall-mounted monitor that had carried the broadcast still showed its normal display, the class schedule for the following day, but no one was looking at it. They were all looking at nothing, processing what they had just seen. The overhead lights buzzed. Outside, the distant sounds of the campus, normally a comfort, felt hollow and far away. Tenya Ida was the first to move. He adjusted his glasses, a habitual gesture that meant his mind was racing. The broadcast originated from a position approximately 300 kilometers off the Pacific coast. The electromagnetic signature suggests a localized magnetic field of extraordinary density. His cognitive and technological capabilities, he trailed off. Even he couldn't fill the silence with analysis for long. Shoto Todoroki sat motionless near the window. His heterochromatic eyes were fixed on the monitor. His face betrayed nothing, but his left hand, resting on the desk, was generating steam. Not flames, just heat. The involuntary output of someone whose body was reacting to stress, his face wouldn't show. Momo Yaoyoroza had her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wide. She was thinking, calculating, running through every variable and finding no solution that ended well. Suyuasui croaked softly. That was real, she said. Her voice was flat, matter of fact. That wasn't a threat. That was a promise. Eijiro Kirishima was gripping the edge of his desk. His knuckles were hardened, his quirk activating unconsciously. How the hell do we fight something like that? He said. Did you see what was behind him? He built that. He pulled that out of the ocean. Denki Kaminari laughed. It was the wrong kind of laugh, high and thin and slightly unhinged. We don't, he said. That's the answer. We don't fight that. Nobody fights that. That's not, Kirishima started. Dude, he folded reality on camera. That's not a villain. That's a natural disaster with opinions. Silence again, heavy and pressing. In the back of the room, Ochako Uraraka was looking at her hands in her lap. She hadn't spoken since the broadcast ended. Her brown eyes were distant, thoughtful, sad. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet enough that only the students nearest to her heard it at first. He's crying. Heads turned. Ida looked at her. What? Behind all that power, Uraraka said. She looked up from her hands. Her expression was open, hurting. He's just crying. Didn't you see it? He's in pain. Everything he said, it wasn't a threat. It was a cry for help. He's angry because he's hurt, and he doesn't know what else to be. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. The kind that comes when someone says something true that nobody wanted to hear. At the back corner of the room, Katsuki Bakugo said nothing. He hadn't moved since the broadcast began. His hands were on his desk. The wood beneath his fingers was splintered, cracked by the involuntary force of his grip. Small sparks popped and fizzled across his palms, the nitroglycerin sweat igniting without his conscious input. He was trembling, not from fear. Not exactly. From something worse. From the sudden, crushing, undeniable understanding that everything he had built his identity around, being the strongest, being the best, being the one who stood at the top, was irrelevant. That somewhere out in the Pacific Ocean, there existed a being so far beyond him that the gap wasn't a gap at all. It was an abyss. An infinity. He said nothing. He looked at no one. He just sat there, hands sparking, wood splintering, and felt the entire framework of his self-concept crack under a weight it was never designed to bear. Aizawa entered the room 4 minutes later. His expression was grimmer than any of them had ever seen it. His capture weapon was already wound tight around his neck, a combat-ready configuration that he normally only adopted in the field. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this," he said. "You all saw the broadcast. The Hero Commission is calling an emergency summit. Every available top 10 hero is being mobilized, and they're requesting volunteer representatives from every hero school." He paused. "Let that sink in. This isn't an order. This isn't a mandate. If any of you want to sit this out, there's no shame in it. What's out there?" He stopped himself. Something flickered across his face that might have been fear. "What's out there is beyond anything any of you were trained for." Kirishima stood up. "I'm going." "Me too," Kaminari said. His earlier panic apparently transmuted into something like defiance. One by one, hands went up. Voices joined. The whole class. Aizawa watched them. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture, the slight loosening of his shoulders, the barely perceptible nod, said what his face wouldn't. "Get your gear. We deploy in 3 hours." The Hero Commission's emergency summit lasted 40 minutes. It was held in a secure underground facility beneath the National Diet Building. Every available top 10 hero attended in person or via holographic link. All Might was there, in his true form, thin, gaunt, blood-stained at the corner of his mouth, but present. His sunken eyes were more serious than anyone in the room had ever seen them. He had said 3 words since arriving: "I'm coming along." Endeavor stood against the back wall with his arms crossed. His flames were low, barely flickering, a controlled burn that reflected the controlled fury in his expression. He had said nothing at all. The commission's chairwoman, a severe woman named Nagant, stood at the head of the table. She laid out what they knew. The target was 300 kilometers offshore. The island appeared on no satellite imagery prior to 72 hours ago. The being on the broadcast matched no known villain profile. Principal Nezu was confirmed missing. Attempts to contact UA's administration had been met with automated responses. "Our assessment," she said, "is that this individual represents an Omega-level threat. Classification unprecedented. We are recommending a full-force response, every available hero, supported by a student contingent for observational and support roles only." "Support roles," Endeavor repeated. The words sounded like they tasted bad. "The students are not being sent to fight," Nagant clarified. "They are being sent because the broadcast specifically mentioned them. This individual invited them. Refusing the invitation entirely may escalate the situation. And accepting it might get them killed," Aizawa said from his seat near the back. "Everything might get them killed," Nagant replied flatly. "We're past the point of safe options." All Might stood. The room went quiet. Even in his diminished form, even after passing on One for All, even as a shadow of the symbol of peace, the man commanded silence simply by existing. "I'll go first," he said. His voice was thin but steady. "If this is about the hero system, if this young man was made by someone in our world and failed by our system, then I bear responsibility. I should have known. I should have seen it." "Toshinori," Aizawa began. "I'll go first," All Might repeated. "That's final." No one argued. 3 hours later, a convoy of naval vessels departed from the nearest port. 6 ships, military grade, carrying 43 pro heroes, 20 students from UA's hero course, and a support team of analysts and medical personnel. They sailed toward the coordinates of the broadcast. The weather was clear. The ocean was calm. The stars were bright. For exactly 100 kilometers, then the storm appeared. It wasn't a natural storm. That was obvious from the moment it became visible on the horizon. Natural storms don't form perfect circles. Natural storms don't glow purple from the inside. Natural storms don't have an eye that extends from the ocean's surface to the upper atmosphere in a column of light visible from space. The hurricane, because that was the closest word for what it was, occupied a ring approximately 100 kilometers in diameter around the island's position. Its wind speeds exceeded anything ever recorded. The waves it generated rose 30 meters above sea level. It was a wall, a test. "He's filtering," Aizawa said, standing on the bridge of the lead vessel. His hair was already whipping in the strengthening winds despite being 50 kilometers from the storm's edge. The broadcast said, "Bring your strongest. This is how he separates the strongest from the rest." "Then we push through," Endeavor said. His flames roared higher, the heat creating a pocket of relative calm around his position on the deck. "Everyone who can't handle it stays behind. Everyone who can follows me." "You're not in charge here," one of the commission liaisons started. Endeavor's head turned. The look he gave the man could have melted steel. The liaison went quiet. They hit the storm wall at full speed. The first ship through nearly capsized. A wave caught it broadside and lifted it nearly vertical before multiple heroes with water or gravity-based quirks managed to stabilize it. 3 support staff were swept overboard, recovered by Tsuyu, who dove into the churning water without hesitation and pulled them back with her tongue. The second ship lost its communications array to a bolt of purple lightning that struck from a clear space within the storm. The third ship had its engine room flooded when a wave broke directly over its bow. Inside the storm, the chaos was absolute. Wind and rain and lightning and waves, all infused with a psychic energy that made them stronger, faster, more brutal than any natural phenomenon. Heroes who could fly were grounded by the wind shear. Heroes who could create barriers found them shattered by the psychic-enhanced waves. But they pushed. They pushed because that was what heroes did. All Might, in his true form, stood at the bow of the lead ship like a figurehead carved from bone. He couldn't do what he used to do, couldn't punch the storm away, couldn't change the weather with the force of his fists. But he stood there, visible. A reminder to everyone behind him of what they were supposed to be. Endeavor flew. He shouldn't have been able to. The winds were too strong, the lightning too frequent. But the man was burning so hot that he created his own thermal updrafts, riding columns of superheated air through gaps in the storm that shouldn't have existed. He punched through walls of rain with his fists wreathed in white-hot flame. Todoroki, on the deck of the second ship, split his power in half. Ice on one side, holding the ship's hull together where the waves had cracked it. Fire on the other, evaporating incoming waves before they could hit broadside. Bakugo was in the air. Explosions from his palms kept him aloft, but the wind threw him sideways with every gust. He compensated with more explosions. Bigger ones, the kind that left his hands raw and bleeding. He didn't slow down. He didn't drop back. Whatever was in him, the fury, the need to prove himself, the desperate refusal to be small, it burned hotter than the storm. Uraraka was below deck, touching every piece of essential equipment and making it weightless so the ships wouldn't be dragged under by their own mass in the flooded compartments. She worked quietly. Without complaint, the storm lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of fighting against something that wasn't alive but felt like it was trying to kill them. 3 hours of raw, grinding endurance against a force that didn't tire and didn't relent. When they finally broke through, when the wind died and the waves calmed and the purple lightning stopped falling from a sky that was suddenly impossibly clear, they were fewer than when they started. 2 of the 6 ships had turned back. Their crews and passengers had reached their limits. No shame. The storm was simply beyond what they could survive. Of the remaining 4 ships, all had taken significant damage. Hull breaches, lost equipment, injured personnel, but they were through. And ahead of them, rising from the dark Pacific waters, was the island. It was worse in person. The broadcast hadn't captured the scale, couldn't have through a screen. The fortress rose from the ocean like a mountain carved by alien hands. Black stone, slick with ocean spray, stretched upward in impossible spires that caught the moonlight. The central tower loomed above everything else, a monolith against the night sky. The air around the island was still, perfectly still. After 3 hours of apocalyptic storm, the contrast was unsettling, like stepping from a war zone into a cathedral. There, Aizawa pointed, a dock. smooth black stone extending from the island's base into the water. Wide enough for the remaining ships to berth, they docked in silence. Heroes and students disembarked onto the stone platform, their footsteps echoing in the unnatural quiet. The fortress loomed above them, featureless and dark, offering no obvious entrance. Then the wall opened. A section of the stone simply slid aside, revealing a passage lit by a soft, ambient purple glow. The light had no visible source. It simply existed within the stone itself, and standing at the entrance, hands clasped behind his back, was Nezu. He looked the same as always, small, white-furred, beady-eyed, wearing his usual waistcoat and tie. But something was wrong, something in his expression, or rather in the absence of expression. His face was pleasant, his posture was relaxed, but his eyes held nothing. No spark, no intelligence behind the intelligence, like a computer wearing a costume. "Welcome," Nezu said. His voice was perfectly pleasant. "You've been expected. Please follow me." "Nezu," Aizawa started. "The master has prepared a demonstration," Nezu continued, as if Aizawa hadn't spoken. "If you'll follow me, I'll escort you to the main arena." He turned and walked into the passage. His small feet made no sound on the stone floor. The heroes exchanged looks. Aizawa's face was tight with fury. Whether at the situation or at seeing his colleague reduced to this, it was impossible to tell. All Might placed a hand on Aizawa's shoulder. "We go," he said. "We face what's in there. That's why we came." They followed Nezu into the fortress. The passage was long. It led them deep into the island's interior, downward through spiraling corridors of smooth black stone lit by that ever-present purple glow. The air grew warmer, denser. There was a vibration in the floor, subtle, constant. Like the heartbeat of something enormous sleeping beneath their feet. No one spoke. The sounds of their footsteps, boots, shoes, the clank of support equipment echoed off the walls and came back to them distorted. The corridor was wide enough for them to walk four abreast, but most clustered together instinctively. Safety in numbers. Even though numbers meant nothing here, Bakugo walked alone. Ahead of the main group, just behind Nezu. His hands were at his sides. His palms were dry. He hadn't set off a single spark since they entered the island. His face was blank, focused. Whatever internal battle he was fighting it in silence. The corridor opened into a space that stopped everyone in their tracks. The arena. It was vast. A circular chamber hundreds of meters across, with walls that rose to a domed ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. The floor was smooth black stone, polished to a mirror finish that reflected the figures of the heroes standing at its edge like ghosts beneath their feet. But that wasn't what stopped them. At the far end of the arena, set into the wall, was a bank of transparent tubes. Dozens of them. Each one filled with a pale green fluid that bubbled gently around a suspended figure, figures they recognized. That's me," Kirishima whispered. It was. A perfect copy of Eijiro Kirishima floated in one of the tubes. Eyes closed, body relaxed, every detail exact. The red hair, the scar above his eye, the muscular build, identical. Next to it, a copy of Kaminari. Then Yaoyorozu. Then Ida. Then Todoroki. Then, in a tube twice the size of the others, a copy of All Might. Not the thin, diminished true form. The full power version. Massive. Golden-haired. Perfect. Every hero present. Every student. Cloned. Suspended. Waiting. What the hell? Kaminari's voice was barely audible. "Welcome to the demonstration." The voice came from above. Every head snapped upward. Izuku Midoriya descended from the darkness above the arena like a god descending from heaven, slowly, gracefully. His bare feet never touched the ground. He hovered a meter above the polished floor, his body radiating that violet glow, his eyes burning with power that made the air around him shimmer. He looked different than the broadcast. More composed. More certain. The rawness of his recent awakening had been tempered into something harder, colder, more controlled. He looked at the gathered heroes and students the way a scientist looks at data. "You made it through the storm," he said. "Good. That means you're strong enough to be worth showing this to." "What have you done?" All Might stepped forward. His thin body was taut with tension, his sunken eyes locked on Izuku with an intensity that belied his frail appearance. "Those people in those tubes are not people," Izuku said. "They're copies, grown from your DNA, all of which was available through public databases, hero registration files, and UA's own medical records." He glanced at Nezu. "Thank you for that, by the way." Nezu inclined his head with that blank, pleasant expression. You cloned us, Todoroki said. His voice was flat, controlled. But his left side was burning, flames licking up his arm, melting the moisture in the air around him into steam. Why? To prove a point, Izuku said. He floated forward, passing above the gathered heroes like a hawk over prey. The hero system is built on the idea that individual power, individual will, is what defines strength. That your emotions, your drive, your human desire to protect, that these things make you superior fighters. He stopped above the bank of tubes, extended his hand toward them. The green fluid bubbled faster. I removed those things. Your copies have no emotions, no drive, no will. They have only your quirks, enhanced beyond your natural limits, and an optimization of combat efficiency that your human minds could never achieve. You're insane, Endeavor growled. He was burning hot, hotter than anyone in the room had ever seen him. The floor beneath his feet was beginning to glow. Am I? Izuku looked down at him. You shaped your own son into a weapon to surpass all might. You broke your family to forge a stronger tool. How am I different from you? Endeavor's flame stuttered, just for a moment, just long enough for something like shame to flicker across his face before rage consumed it. The difference, Izuku continued, is that I'm honest about what I'm doing. I'm not hiding behind words like heroism and legacy. I'm showing you what you really are. Tools. Weapons, things made for a purpose, and I'm showing you that tools without feelings are better than tools with them. He turned in the air to face the full assembly, students and heroes alike, 40-odd faces staring up at him with expressions ranging from terror to fury to something very close to despair. Here is my challenge, he said. Fight your clones, prove me wrong. Show me that your emotions, your will, your human weakness makes you stronger than the perfect version of yourself. The tubes opened, green fluid drained. The figures inside stirred. Their eyes opened, blank, white, soulless. And they stepped out onto the arena floor with movements that were identical to the originals, but stripped of everything that made them human. Clone Kirishima's skin hardened instantly, harder than the original had ever managed, the crystalline structure denser and more uniform. Clone Todoroki split his temperature without hesitation, ice and fire manifesting simultaneously with a precision the original had never achieved. Clone All Might. The full power version cracked his knuckles and the sound echoed through the arena like a gunshot. Or don't, Izuku said, floating higher above the arena. Refuse. Walk away. Admit that you came here knowing you couldn't win, and that the entire concept of heroism is a lie you tell yourselves to justify using children as soldiers. That's enough. All Might's voice cut through the arena. Thin, strained, but absolute. He stepped forward, past the other heroes, past the students, into the center of the arena, face to face with the clone of himself, the version he could never be again, the towering golden-haired symbol of peace looking down at the skeleton that remained. Young man, All Might said, looking up at Izuku. I don't know everything that was done to you. I don't know who made you or what they put you through, but I know this. He raised his fists, not in the confident, triumphant pose of the symbol of peace, in the exhausted, determined stance of a man who was going to fight even though he knew he couldn't win. Heroism isn't about being the strongest. It's about standing up even when you can't win, especially when you can't win. And I'll show you that, even with this body, even against a perfect version of what I used to be. Izuku looked down at him. Something shifted in those violet eyes, something that might have been curiosity, or contempt, or something else entirely that he didn't have a name for yet. Then show me, Izuku said. All Might charged. Clone All Might met him halfway. The impact of their collision sent a shockwave through the arena that knocked everyone within 20 meters off their feet. The floor cracked in a starburst pattern beneath them. The sound was like thunder compressed into a single point. All Might was thrown backward. Of course he was. He had no power left. No one for all. Nothing except the body of a dying man and the will of someone who had carried the world on his shoulders for 30 years. He hit the ground, rolled, got back up. Clone All Might was already there. A punch that should have ended it, driven with the full unrestricted power of one for all at maximum output. Enough force to level a city block. All Might caught it, not with strength. He didn't have the strength. He caught it by reading the angle, by positioning his body perfectly, by using 40 years of combat experience to redirect just enough of the force that it didn't kill him instantly. He was still sent flying. He hit the wall hard enough to crater it. Blood flew from his mouth. Something in his chest cracked. He got back up. "Is that all you have?" All Might said. He was smiling, blood on his teeth, fire in his sunken eyes. "I fought stronger than you on a Tuesday." He charged again. The arena erupted into chaos. Clone Todoroki attacked the original with a wall of ice 3 meters thick. Todoroki split it with fire, only to be caught off guard by a follow-up blast of flame from the clone's left side, hotter than his own maximum output. He was thrown sideways, his costume singed, his skin blistering. Clone Kirishima rushed the original with a hardening level that made his fists look like polished diamond. Kirishima met him head-on, their hardened bodies clashing with the sound of boulders colliding. But the clone's hardening was denser. Kirishima's fists cracked first. He stumbled, but didn't. Clone Bakugo, a being with the explosive power of the original, but no hesitation, no ego, no wasted movement, detonated a blast point blank at the real Bakugo's position. The explosion was massive. When the smoke cleared, Bakugo was standing, barely, his costume shredded, burns running up both arms. His face was twisted in rage. "You think a copy of me can beat me?" Bakugo roared. He launched himself at the clone with everything he had. The resulting explosion exchange lit up the arena like a firework display. Detonation after detonation, each one bigger than the last, but the clone didn't get tired, didn't lose focus, didn't burn through its reserves. It just kept coming with more power and less waste. And Bakugo knew, somewhere deep in the part of himself that he'd never admit existed, that he was losing. Uraraka fought her clone in silence. The clone used her gravity power with a precision she had never achieved, touching objects at range and floating them as projectiles, creating localized gravity wells that pulled opponents off their feet. The original could barely keep up. She dodged, she improvised, she used her environment, but she was outmatched. They all were. Izuku floated above the carnage, watching. His violet eyes tracked every fight simultaneously. His expression was unreadable. Below him, heroes fell, one by one. Clone after clone proved stronger, faster, more efficient than the original. The enhanced quirks, pushed beyond human limits by optimization algorithms and psychic augmentation, simply overpowered the natural versions. Eraserhead tried to use his quirk on the clones. His erasing gaze locked onto Clone Todoroki and the clone's temperature manipulation stuttered. For a moment, hope flared. But Izuku had anticipated this. A psychic pulse, invisible, instantaneous, hit Aizawa from above. Not enough to hurt him, just enough to break his concentration. His eyes blinked. The erasure failed. Clone Todoroki's ice hit him full force, encasing his lower body and pinning him to the floor. Endeavor faced his own clone and burned hotter than he ever had. His flames went from orange to blue to white. The arena around him scorched and melted. But the clone burned hotter still. Izuku's enhancement had pushed its thermal output beyond anything the human body could sustain. And the clone didn't have a human body's limitations. Endeavor went down on one knee. His flames guttered. The clone stood over him, burning with a cold, soulless efficiency that mocked everything Endeavor was. All Might was still fighting. He shouldn't have been. He had taken hits that should have killed him 10 times over. His body was broken, ribs cracked, blood flowing freely, one arm hanging limp. But he was still moving, still dodging, still throwing punches that did nothing but prove that he refused to stop. "Why?" Izuku asked. His voice carried through the arena despite the chaos. "You can't win. You know you can't. The logical action is to yield." All Might looked up at him. One eye was swollen shut. Blood ran from his hairline down his face. His chest rattled with every breath. He smiled. "Because there's a kid up there who needs to see that power isn't everything. That the thing that makes us heroes isn't our quirks or our strength. It's the choice to stand up for what's right, even when every calculation says we should stay down." He turned back to his clone, raised his fists again. His body was trembling. His vision was blurring. But he was standing. "I am the symbol of peace," All Might said. "And I don't yield. Not to villains, not to gods, not to perfect copies of what I used to be." He charged again. Clone All Might hit him with everything. The punch connected clean. All Might's body lifted off the ground. He flew across the arena and hit the far wall with a sound that made every student watching flinch. He didn't get up this time. Silence fell. The clones stood motionless, their opponents defeated or incapacitated. The arena floor was cracked, scorched, frozen, and cratered from a dozen simultaneous battles. Heroes lay scattered across it like fallen soldiers. Izuku descended to the floor. His feet touched down on the polished stone for the first time. The surface rippled beneath him as if even the ground acknowledged his presence as something beyond normal. He walked toward All Might's crumpled form. The students watched him approach. Kirishima, on his knees, his hardening cracked and bleeding, tried to stand and couldn't. Kaminari was unconscious. Yaoyorozu was barely conscious, propped against a wall. Todoroki was breathing hard, one arm frozen to the floor by his own clone's ice. Only Uraraka was still on her feet, battered, bruised, but standing. And as Izuku passed her on his way to All Might, she spoke. "You felt them, didn't you?" Izuku stopped. "The people you were forced to hurt," she said. Her voice was shaking but steady. "When you were in that suit, you felt all of it. Every person." Izuku didn't turn to look at her. "That's why you're doing this," Uraraka continued. "Not because you think clones are better, not because you think emotions are weakness. You're doing this because feeling hurt so badly that you'd rather prove it's worthless than admit it matters." The violet glow around Izuku's body flickered. Just for a moment, just enough for someone watching closely to notice. "You're wrong," he said. His voice was quiet. "I am beyond human emotion." "Then why are you shaking?" He looked down at his hands. She was right, the slightest tremor, barely visible, but real. He clenched his fists. The tremor stopped, the violet glow stabilized. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled. Cold. Final. "This demonstration is over. The results speak for themselves. Your heroes are broken. Your strongest couldn't defeat their own reflections. Humanity is flawed. Emotion is weakness. And you're alone." He turned. All Might had spoken. The man was still on the ground, hadn't moved, could barely lift his head. But his eyes were open, and they were looking at Izuku with something that wasn't fear or anger. It was pity. "You're alone, young man," All Might said. "All that power, all that intelligence, and you're alone on an island in the middle of the ocean with a brainwashed animal and a room full of copies. That's not strength, that's desperation." Izuku's eyes flared. The ground cracked beneath his feet. The air pressure in the arena spiked so sharply that several students grabbed their ears. "You don't know me," Izuku said. "You don't get to judge me." "I'm not judging you." All Might's voice was gentle now, soft, the voice of a teacher speaking to a student who has lost their way. "I'm telling you what I see, a boy who was hurt so badly that he'd rather destroy the world than admit he wants to be part of it." The pressure spiked again, harder. All Might's body pressed into the floor. The stone beneath him cracked deeper, but the man kept talking. "I see you," All Might said. "And I'm sorry. For whatever we did, for whatever the system did, for whatever they made you into. I'm sorry." The arena was silent except for the sound of Izuku's breathing. Fast, uneven. The controlled mask he'd been wearing since the demonstration began was cracking. Hairline fractures running through it. Just like the hairline fractures that had freed him from his suit. For a long moment. Long enough that every person in the room thought the next second might be their last. Izuku Midoriya stood with his fists clenched and his eyes blazing and looked at All Might. Like a drowning man looks at a rope he's afraid to grab. Then the mask sealed itself shut. The cracks vanished. The control returned. The violet glow settled into a steady, even burn. "Save your pity," Izuku said. "You'll need it for what comes next." He raised his hand. The clones in the arena, all of them, froze in place. Then, one by one, they returned to their tubes. The green fluid filled again, the tubes sealed. "This was a demonstration," Izuku said, floating upward. "A sample. Next time, there won't be an arena. There won't be rules. Next time, I come to your world." He looked down at the broken heroes and battered students one last time. "Go home. Heal. Tell the world what you saw here. Tell them what's coming. And tell them." He paused. And in that pause, something real crossed his face. Something vulnerable and ancient and deeply, profoundly tired. "Tell them that the weapon they built is awake and it wants answers." He vanished. There one moment, gone the next. The The violet light that permeated the arena dimmed to nothing. The ambient hum in the walls faded. The fortress felt suddenly hollow. Empty, Anezu blinked. His eyes cleared. The blankness draining away like water running off glass. He looked around, confused, disoriented. The last thing he remembered was his office at UA. "What?" he started. Then he saw the arena, the damage, the injured heroes, the tubes of clones. His small body went rigid with horror. Aizawa, freed from his ice prison by Todoroki's fire, was the first to reach All Might. The man was alive but unconscious. His breathing was shallow. His body was broken in ways that would take weeks to heal, but he was breathing. "We need to go," Aizawa said. His voice was hoarse. "Now, before this whole place decides to sink back into the ocean." They gathered their wounded. They limped and carried and dragged each other back through the corridors, through the passage, out onto the stone dock where their battered ships waited. Behind them, the fortress stood silent and dark against the night sky. The storm was gone. The ocean was calm. The stars were bright. Uraraka was the last to board the ship. She stood on the dock for a long moment, looking back at the island. Her expression was unreadable. Sad. Determined. Something else that she couldn't quite name. "We'll come back," she said, to the boy who might still be listening. "And next time, we won't fight you. We'll reach you." She turned and boarded the ship. The convoy sailed home in silence. Behind them, the fortress of black stone stood alone in the Pacific, unmoved by the waves lapping at its base. And somewhere inside it, or above it, or beyond it, Izuku Midoriya sat in the dark and thought about what All Might had said. "You're alone." He closed his eyes. The violet light dimmed to nothing, and in the darkness of his mind, in the place where the memories of two lives coexisted in an uneasy truce, a voice whispered. Was he right? He didn't answer. He sat in the dark and let the question exist without resolution. Because he had learned in this life and the one before that some questions were more dangerous than any weapon, and he was already the most dangerous thing alive. The question sat with him through the night. He did not answer it. He did not try. He let it exist in the space between thoughts the way a stone exists at the bottom of a river, present, heavy, unmoved by the current flowing over it. The fortress was silent around him. The ocean was silent below. The sky was silent above. Was he right? Izuku sat in the dark of the central tower and felt the weight of those three words pressing against him like something physical. His eyes were closed. His glow was dim. A faint pulse of violet at his temples and fingertips, the baseline output of a mind that could not fully shut down even when it wanted to. The air around him was warm from the residual psychic energy bleeding off his skin. He thought about All Might's eyes. Sunken. Broken. Looking at him with something that had no business being in the eyes of a man he had just beaten half to death. He thought about the girl, Uraraka, and the way she had said he was crying and how the word had hit him harder than any attack in the arena. He thought about the silence that had followed his departure, the way the heroes had not pursued him, the way the ships had turned and sailed home and left him here, alone in the dark, in the fortress he had built from rage and ocean stone. Was he right? The question did not resolve. He did not let it. He sat with it in the dark and breathed and existed, and that was enough for now. It was still dark when the first reports hit the news. The convoy returned to port at 4:17 a.m. Camera crews were already waiting. Someone had leaked the deployment timeline, or perhaps the massive naval mobilization had simply been impossible to hide. The footage that aired in the early hours of that morning would be replayed for weeks. Ships with buckled hulls limping into dock. Heroes carried on stretchers, their costumes torn, their bodies bandaged and broken. Students, children, the anchors kept saying, children, being guided off gangplanks with blank, hollow expressions that no 17-year-old should wear. The nation woke to disaster. By 7 a.m., every major network was running continuous coverage. The broadcast from 3 days ago was replayed alongside the new footage. Experts were brought on to analyze. Former heroes, retired military strategists, quirk researchers, all of them saying different things in different ways that all amounted to the same conclusion. They had gone to the island. They had faced what was there. They had lost. The Hero Commission held their press conference at noon. Chairwoman Nagant stood behind a podium in the same underground facility where the summit had been held. facing a room packed with journalists whose questions overlapped into a wall of noise. The operation was a strategic assessment, Nagant said. Her face was a mask of composure that fooled no one. The objective was to evaluate the threat level and establish a basis for future. 43 heroes were deployed and 26 came back injured. A reporter shouted from the third row, 7 are in critical condition. Is this what strategic assessment looks like? The individual in question represents an unprecedented. He said the system created him. Is that true? Was this individual manufactured by whom? Under whose authority? The press conference lasted 11 minutes before Nagant terminated it. The damage was already done. The footage of her walking away from the podium, back straight, face rigid, refusing to turn around, became the image of the day. The public was not unified in their response. That was the part that frightened the commission most. Half the country saw the broadcast and the aftermath and felt what they were supposed to feel. Fear, outrage, a rallying cry to support their heroes. These were the people who changed their profile pictures to hero emblems, who organized vigils, who donated to relief funds. The other half heard what Izuku had said in his broadcast and sat with it longer than they were comfortable admitting. The hero system takes children and shapes them into soldiers. The weapon you forge became too sharp to hold. They didn't endorse what he had done. They didn't support the violence. But there was something in the accusation that landed too close to observations they had been making for years. Online forums split into war zones. Editorials ran on both sides. A retired hero with 20 years of service published a piece that said, in careful and devastating language, that the system's failures had been visible for a long time and that pretending otherwise was going to get more people killed. The piece was pulled within 6 hours. That only made people angrier. Japan was cracking, and the crack was spreading. The international response came within 48 hours. In Washington, the American Hero Association convened an emergency session. Their top agency, a 5-person strike team called Meridian, was placed on standby within 12 hours of the broadcast footage reaching American networks. Meridian was not a publicity operation. They did not do interviews. They did not have fan merchandise. They were the team that governments called when the situation had moved past what cameras should see. 5 heroes, each of them carrying quirks that had been refined through decades of high-stakes operations into instruments of extraordinary lethality. Their leader, a woman named Cole, whose quirk allowed her to harden ambient air into solid barriers of any shape and density, watched the footage from the island assault three times in her office before speaking. That's not a villain, she said to her team. That's a paradigm shift. Everyone in that arena fought like they were dealing with a person who happened to be powerful. They're wrong. That's a force. You don't fight forces. You survive them or you don't. So, what do we do? Asked Voss, the team's long-range specialist. His quirk generated kinetic lances, invisible projectiles that hit with the force of artillery shells from 3 kilometers away. We go, Cole said, and we accept that survival is the best possible outcome. She looked around the room. Anyone who isn't okay with those odds stays home. No judgment. No one stayed home. From Europe, a coordinated response formed under NATO's enhanced threat protocols. 6 heroes from 4 countries, each of them selected for complementary quirk profiles and experience in high-casualty engagements. From South Korea, a 2-person team whose combined quirk synergy had ended a villain crisis in Busan 3 years ago in under 4 minutes. From Australia, a single hero, a man named Ashworth, whose gravitational quirk could reduce the effective weight of anything in a 50-meter radius to 0. The United Nations issued a statement. It said very little of substance. It acknowledged the situation. It expressed concern. It offered support. It did not say what everyone was thinking, which was that no institution on Earth had a framework for dealing with what was happening. Privately, in encrypted communications between heads of state, the word that kept appearing was the one no one wanted to say out loud. Extinction level. The world was holding its breath, and 300 kilometers off the coast of Japan, in the dark of a fortress that had no lights because its occupant did not need them, the most powerful being alive was sitting still and thinking about a question he could not answer. The preparations took 6 days. 6 days of logistics and coordination and arguments and grief and the kind of desperate, grinding work that happens when an entire civilization decides to throw everything it has at a single point. Ships were mobilized, aircraft were fueled, support infrastructure was assembled. Medical teams were briefed on injuries they had never seen before and hoped never to see again. And in those 6 days, in the quiet spaces between the planning and the urgency, people lived. They lived in the way people live when they suspect the living might be running out. Mirio Togata found himself in the UA common room at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, surrounded by first-year students who should have been sleeping. They were sitting on couches and chairs and the floor, wrapped in blankets and holding cups of tea that had long since gone cold, and they were looking at him with the kind of desperate hope that people aim at lighthouses in storms. He was not supposed to be here. He was supposed to be in the strategy meetings with the other third years and the commission liaisons, reviewing approach vectors and defensive formations. But he had slipped away an hour ago because he could feel the weight of those meetings pressing down on the younger students through walls and closed doors, and because he knew, the way he always knew, where he was needed most. "Here's the thing," Mirio said. He was sitting on the arm of a couch, one leg swinging. His face was open, warm. The kind of face that made you believe everything would be fine even when every piece of evidence said otherwise. Being a hero was never about being invincible. It was never about winning every fight. If it was, then every hero who ever lost would have failed, and that's not true. They didn't fail. A first year, a girl with a leaf-based quirk who had been accepted to UA 2 months ago and was now watching the world prepare for war, looked up at him. "Then what is it about?" Mirio smiled. And the thing about Mirio's smile, the thing that made Tamaki look away and Najiri lean closer and everyone in the room feel like the temperature had risen 2 degrees, was that it was never performance. It was never the mask over something else. It was him, just him, completely, vulnerably, impossibly him. "It's about choosing," he said, "every morning, every time. Choosing to be the person who stands up, even when it hurts, even when it's stupid, even when every smart person in the room is telling you to sit down." He looked around at the faces watching him. "That choice is the whole thing. The quirks are just details." The room was quiet. The first year with the leaf quirk was crying. She didn't seem to notice. "What if we can't?" another student asked. Small voice. "Afraid." "Then you can't," Mirio said, simply, without judgment. "And that's okay. That's allowed. Nobody gets to tell you that your limit is wrong." He leaned forward. "But I'll tell you something I've learned. Your limit is almost never where you think it is. It's almost always further out. You just have to be willing to walk toward it to find out." He stayed in the common room until midnight. He told stories, some funny, some not, all of them true. He answered questions he had no good answers for, with honesty instead of comfort. And when the students finally drifted toward their beds, lighter than they had been 2 hours ago, Mirio sat alone on the couch for a long time. His smile was still there. But in the empty room, with no one watching, it changed. The warmth remained, but something else joined it. Something quieter and older and aware of costs that he would never let anyone else carry. He sat with it. Then he stood up and went to find Tamaki. Shoto Todoroki was in his dorm room. The lights were off. His left side provided the only illumination, a low, steady burn along his shoulder that cast orange shadows across the walls. The warmth was unnecessary. The building had central heating, but his body did it anyway, the way bodies do things when the mind is somewhere else. He was sitting in the chair by the window, facing outward. The glass reflected his face back at him, split down the middle, red and white, fire and ice. The dual inheritance that had defined every moment of his life since before his birth. He was thinking about the broadcast, about the words that had come through every screen in the country and landed in this room like stones dropped into still water. You shaped your own son into a weapon to surpass all might. You broke your family to forge a stronger tool. The boy on the broadcast, Izuku, had said that to Endeavor, had thrown it at him like an accusation. And it was. It was true. Every word of it was true, and Shoto had known it was true for years. But something about hearing it from outside, from someone who had lived the same truth in a different shape, hit different. Izuku had been made, built from genetics and kept in a tank and pointed at targets. Shoto had been made too, not in a lab, in a family, with a mother who broke under the weight of it and siblings who became afterthoughts and a childhood that was just a training ground wearing the skin of a home. They were the same thing, different methods, same result. He looked at his reflection. The scar over his left eye, his mother's mark, his mother's breaking point, caught the light from his own flame. He had spent years refusing to use that flame. Then he had spent years learning to use it without the refusal. Both phases had been about his father. Both had been about proving something or refusing something that ultimately connected back to the same man. He was tired of his power being about anyone other than himself. He pressed his right hand against the glass. Frost spread from his palm in delicate patterns. His left shoulder burned hotter. The window fogged between the two temperatures, obscuring his reflection. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The decision was already made. It had been made in the arena, lying on the floor with ice and fire both spent, looking up at a ceiling he couldn't see. The decision was simple and total, and it belonged to him alone. He would go back to that island. He would face that power again. And whatever happened, whatever the result, it would be his. His choice. His fire. His ice. His, nobody else's. The training room at UA was designed to withstand the output of every student in the hero course simultaneously. Reinforced walls, shock-absorbing floors, automated target systems that could be rebuilt in minutes after destruction. At 3 a.m., every target in the room was already rubble. The walls were scorched black. The floor was cratered. The ventilation system was straining against the smoke, and the chemical smell of nitroglycerin byproduct, Katsuki Bakugo, stood in the center of the destruction, with his hands at his sides. His palms were raw, the skin cracked and weeping from hours of sustained detonation. His chest heaved. His costume was in his locker, unworn. He was in a tank top and shorts, both soaked through with sweat. He had been here since midnight. 3 hours of continuous, maximal output explosion work against targets that couldn't fight back. It looked like training. It felt like training. His body went through the motions of training with the same aggressive precision it always had. But it wasn't training, it was running. Because standing still meant sitting down, and sitting down meant his mind going to the place it had been trying to go since the arena, the place where the framework lived, the one he had built his entire identity on since he was 4 years old. Strongest, best, top, number one. The framework that said his worth was his power, and his power was his distance from everyone below him. That framework was gone. He had felt it crack on the island, felt it splinter when he watched Izuku stop every attack in the arena without moving, felt it shatter completely when he stood on the deck of the ship going home and realized that the gap between himself and what they had faced was not a gap he could close. Not with training, not with time, not with anything. His explosions were getting weaker. His reserves were draining. Each detonation came smaller than the last, his body reaching its limit while his mind refused to acknowledge limits existed. He fired again, a blast from his right palm that should have shaken the room. It barely cracked the far wall. He stared at his hands, shaking, raw, bleeding at the creases. He dropped to one knee, not from exhaustion alone, from the weight of the thing he would not name. The thing that lived in the gap between who he had told the world he was and who he actually was at 3 a.m. in an empty room with no one watching. He stayed there, one knee on the scorched floor, hands dripping, head bowed. He did not cry. Not yet. But the sound he made, a single exhale through clenched teeth too loud for the silent room, carried everything he would never say. He stayed until 5 a.m. Then he stood, wiped his hands on his shorts, and walked out. His face was the same as it always was, locked down, aggressive, daring anyone to comment. No one was in the hallway to see it, which was good, because the eyes above that lockdown face were red in a way that had nothing to do with smoke. Ochako Uraraka was writing. Her desk lamp was the only light in her room. The notebook in front of her was open to a page covered in her small, round handwriting. The kind of handwriting that teachers called neat and her parents called cute, and that she had never bothered to change because there were bigger things to worry about. She was not writing a plan, not writing analysis, not writing the kind of structured tactical notes that Ida would approve of. She was writing the way you write when your head is too full and the only way to make space is to pour some of it onto paper. Fragments covered the page. Scattered thoughts, half sentences that trailed into nothing and then picked up again 3 lines later. He looked so young when the glow went out, and below that, if nobody ever told him his name, if nobody ever just saw him and said, "You are a person," then what was he supposed to become? What would any of us become? And further down in smaller writing, pressed hard enough into the paper that the pen had nearly torn through, I keep thinking about his hands shaking. In the arena, when he stopped mid-kill, his hand was shaking and nobody in that room understood what that meant except me. And I don't know why I understood it, but I did. She paused. Set the pen down. Flexed her fingers. The thing she could not write, the thing that sat beneath all the fragments like bedrock beneath soil, was the certainty. The absolute, bone-deep certainty that had settled in her chest the moment the broadcast aired and had not shifted since. He could be reached. She did not know how. She did not have a plan. She had nothing except the conviction that somewhere beneath the violet light and the crumbling fortresses and the telekinetic force that could reshape geography, somewhere beneath all of that was a person. A boy. Someone who was drowning in his own power because no one had ever thrown him a line that wasn't a leash. She picked up the pen again. When we go back, she wrote, "I am not going to fight him. I am going to talk to him. And if he kills me for it, then at least the last thing he hears before it happens is someone treating him like a person and not a problem." She looked at the words, nodded once, closed the notebook. Outside her window, the campus was dark, quiet. The kind of quiet that lives in the hours before something irrevocable. The medical bay at UA was kept at a constant 18 degrees. Recovery Girl maintained strict environmental controls. Temperature, humidity, light levels, calibrated to optimize healing. It was efficient. It was effective. It was very cold at 2 a.m. Toshinori Yagi was awake. He had been awake for an hour, pulled from sleep by the specific kind of pain that comes from ribs that haven't finished knitting back together, shifting against each other when you breathe wrong. He was propped up on pillows. His body, always thin, always diminished, always a rebuke to what he used to be, looked worse than usual. Bruises that hadn't faded, bandages around his midsection, an IV in his arm delivering nutrients his stomach could no longer process on its own. In his left hand, held gently between fingers that trembled with a fine, constant vibration, was a photograph. The image was small, worn at the edges. The kind of photograph that has been held too many times, carried in too many pockets, looked at in too many dark rooms by someone who needed to remember what they were doing and why. He looked at it for a long time. His expression was private. Still, the expression of a man having a conversation with a memory that no one else was invited to hear. He already knew what he was going to do. He had known since the arena. Since the moment he looked up at that boy floating in the violet light and saw not a threat but a wound, a living wound, conscious and in pain, and lashing out because it did not know any other response. He was going back to that island, not as a hero, not as a symbol, not as anything except himself. Toshinori Yagi, thin and old and broken, and still here for reasons that medicine could not explain, and that he attributed to nothing more complex than stubbornness. He was going back, and he was going to do the one thing that no one in 2 lifetimes had ever done for Izuku Midoriya. He was going to sit down beside him. He tucked the photograph back into the pocket of his hospital gown. He looked at the dark ceiling above him. He breathed. Carefully, managing the pain with the same acceptance he had brought to every limitation his body had imposed over the past 5 years. He closed his eyes. Sleep came eventually. He did not fight it. In the morning, he would discharge himself. In the morning, he would make his way to whatever ship was leaving for the island. In the morning, he would begin the walk that he knew, with perfect clarity, might be his last. But not yet. For now, he slept. And if the ghost of a smile lived on his wasted face while he dreamed, no one was there to see it. The big 3 arrived at UA's main gate together. Early morning. The sun was barely up. The campus was alive with the controlled chaos of full mobilization, support vehicles loading equipment, Students in their hero gear, moving in tight groups between buildings, teachers directing traffic with the grim efficiency of people who have done this before and hoped never to do it again. Mirio walked in front. His steps were easy. His posture was loose. He was wearing his hero costume, the one designed to phase with him, stretched and remade a dozen times since the original, and it fit him the way it always had, like a second skin. Like it belonged to him in a way that was deeper than fabric. He was smiling. Tamaki walked one step behind and to the left. His costume was dark, designed to blend, to disappear, to let his quirk do the talking while he stayed quiet. His hands were in fists at his sides, his shoulders were drawn in. His eyes moved across the campus in quick, darting assessments of everything and everyone. He was terrified. The terror was visible in every line of his body, in the set of his jaw, in the whiteness of his knuckles, in the rapid, shallow breathing that he was trying to control and not entirely succeeding. He was not trying to hide it. He had given up hiding it years ago. Mirio knew. Nejire knew. Everyone who had ever watched him fight knew that Tamaki Amajiki was always afraid, and that the fear never stopped him, and that this contradiction was perhaps the bravest thing about him. Nejire walked on Mirio's other side. She was quieter than usual, which meant she was only talking half as much as a normal person instead of 3 times as much. Her energy was still there, still bright, still kinetic, still spiraling through her like the waves of power that defined her quirk, but it was turned inward today, focused, concentrated. She looked at Mirio, at his smile. "You're going to do something stupid," she said. Not a question. Mirio's smile widened. "Probably. Something really unbelievably stupid. The kind of stupid that makes Tamaki cry." "Hey," Tamaki said, but he did not deny it. He was already looking away, his throat working, because he knew. He had known Mirio for 6 years, and he knew what that particular quality of smile meant, the one that was completely real and completely terrifying. Mirio put his arm around Tamaki's shoulders. Easy. Natural. The weight of his arm, a familiar, grounding presence that Tamaki leaned into before he could stop himself. "Whatever happens," Mirio said, "happens because I chose it. Same as always. Same as every time. That's the deal, right? We choose. Every morning." Tamaki made a sound that was almost a word and looked away harder. Nejire watched them both. Her expression softened into something between tenderness and grief. The grief of someone who can see the shape of what's coming and cannot stop it, and would not stop it even if she could, because stopping it would mean becoming someone she is not. "Let's go," she said, "before I start thinking about this too hard." They walked onto campus, together, the way they had walked into everything for 3 years. The international heroes arrived the following day. Meridian came first. Cole, Voss, and the 3 others whose names and quirks the Japanese press learned within hours of their arrival. They landed at a private airfield outside Tokyo and were escorted to UA under heavy guard. They did not speak to reporters. They did not pose for photographs. They walked through the campus gates with the economy of movement that comes from years of operations where being seen was failure. Cole met with the Japanese hero leadership for 2 hours behind closed doors. When she emerged, her face gave nothing away. But she found Voss in the hallway outside and said, in a voice low enough that only he heard, "The kid broke 40 heroes in 12 minutes the first time. Then he broke 43 more in a controlled environment, and the people who watched it happen are still shaking." "Assessment?" Voss asked. "We go. We do our job. We don't expect to come home." Voss nodded. He had worked with Cole for 11 years. He knew what her voice sounded like when she meant what she said. The European contingent arrived next, then the Korean team. Then Ashworth from Australia, a tall, weathered man in his 50s who walked into the coordination meeting and listened for 20 minutes before asking a single question. "Has anyone tried not fighting him?" The room went quiet. "He issued a challenge," Nagant said. He invited people to come to his island," Ashworth said. His voice was mild, calm, the voice of someone who had seen enough violence to know its limitations. "Coming and fighting are not the same thing." No one had a response to that. Ashworth nodded once and did not bring it up again. But the silence after his question lasted longer than it should have. The commission issued the order on the morning of the 7th day, full mobilization, every licensed hero capable of field deployment, every third-year student who volunteered, every international ally who had committed forces. The largest coordinated hero operation in recorded history. The fleet that assembled in the harbor was 3 times the size of the first expedition. Warships, transport vessels, medical frigates, aircraft carriers modified to serve as mobile command centers, support helicopters, supply barges. The scale was staggering. The cameras that filmed the fleet's departure broadcast images of a naval force that looked like it was heading to war, because it was, on the deck of the flagship, standing among heroes whose combined power had shaped the safety of half the globe for decades. Ochako Uraraka looked out at the open Pacific and thought about a boy floating alone in the dark. She touched the notebook in her breast pocket. The weight of it was nothing. The weight of what was written inside it was everything. Around her, the fleet moved. Forward, toward the island, toward whatever waited there. The day was clear. The wind was cold, the sky was enormous and empty and indifferent, and the ships cut through the flat Pacific water like a blade through silk. It felt like the last day of something. Every person on those ships could feel it, the specific quality of time that exists before a threshold is crossed. The hours before, the quiet before, the last normal breath before everything changes permanently. Izuku felt them coming. He was standing at the highest point of his fortress, the tip of the central tower, 300 meters above the waterline, with his eyes closed and his mind open. His psychic awareness extended outward in an invisible sphere that covered hundreds of kilometers of ocean in every direction. He could feel the fleet like a constellation of mines on the water, hundreds of them, clustered in groups, moving toward him with the unstoppable momentum of something that has been decided upon by many. He did not react. He did not prepare defenses or arm his fortress or wake the clones that still slept in their tubes. He simply stood there, feeling them approach, and felt nothing about it that he could name. No, that wasn't true. He felt something. It was small and buried, and he could not identify it, but it was there, like a frequency just below hearing, present but unresolvable. He opened his eyes. The violet glow caught the morning light and threw it back in fractured patterns. Far away, on the edge of his perception, the fleet was entering the radius where his influence began. He raised his hand toward the sky. The storm built faster this time. In the first expedition, it had been a pre-existing defense, left running like a fence around his territory. This time, he was constructing it in real time, pulling moisture from the atmosphere and charging it with psychic energy until the clouds themselves became weapons. The hurricane formed in minutes, a wall of churning gray-violet cloud, 300 meters tall, rotating around the island in a circle 200 kilometers wide. Lightning crackled within it, not white but deep purple, each bolt carrying enough psychic force to scramble a human nervous system on contact. The waves beneath the storm rose to 40 meters, then 50, then higher. Walls of water moving with the deliberate, directed force of something alive. This time, the storm did not wait to be entered. It attacked. The leading edge of the hurricane accelerated outward, meeting the fleet 50 kilometers before they reached the storm wall. A wave struck the flagship broadside, 40 meters of dark water slamming into the hull with enough force to heel the massive ship nearly onto its side. Heroes scrambled for positions. Commands were shouted over wind that had gone from nothing to screaming in seconds. Above the fleet, the sky turned purple. Lightning fell. Not randomly. Targeted. The first bolt struck the communications array of the command carrier, melting the antenna array into slag. The second hit the flight deck of the aircraft carrier, detonating fuel lines and sending a column of fire into the sky. The third, fourth, and fifth hit in rapid succession, each one finding a piece of critical infrastructure, each one carrying that psychic charge that made electronics die within a meter of the impact point. Inside the storm, things moved, not wind, not waves. Something else. Constructs, built from psychic energy and shaped to forms that had no analog in nature. Massive translucent things that moved through the cloud cover like predators through deep water. They dove at the ships, passing through hulls and decks and compartments, and wherever they passed, the people nearby collapsed. Not dead, not injured, just overwhelmed. Their minds flooding with psychic static that dropped them where they stood. People began to die. A support vessel, crewed by non-hero personnel, engineers, and medical staff, took a wave across its bow that no amount of quirk intervention could stop. The ship rolled. The hull cracked. Of the 43 people aboard, 31 made it off before the vessel went under. 12 did not. A helicopter carrying a reconnaissance team was struck by a bolt of purple lightning mid-flight. The aircraft came apart in the air. The pilot and 3 passengers fell toward the churning ocean below. 2 were caught by heroes. 2 were not. The deaths were quick and they were real, and they were the opening cost of approaching Izuku Midoriya. But the heroes pushed forward. Nejire flew. She had launched from the flight deck of the carrier the moment the storm hit, her wave energy trailing behind her in spirals of blue-white light that cut through the purple gloom like searchlights. The psychic lightning was drawn to her, to the energy she emitted, and she used that. She became a lightning rod, pulling the bolts toward herself and then redirecting them with her spiraling waves, turning the storm's own weapon into scattered, harmless light. She flew through the eye of the storm's worst fury, with her hair streaming behind her and her face set in concentration so deep it looked like prayer. Every bolt she caught, every psychic construct she disrupted with a concentrated wave blast, was a ship below her that didn't die. A person who got to keep breathing. She was buying time. She was magnificent. The international heroes formed chains. Coal hardened the air around 3 ships simultaneously, creating solid barriers that deflected the worst of the waves. Voss fired kinetic lances into the storm wall itself, punching temporary holes in the cloud cover that other heroes exploited to advance. Ashworth dropped the effective gravity around the fleet's most damaged vessels, making them ride higher in the water above the worst of the wave impacts. The Korean team, a man and a woman who had trained together since childhood, synchronized their quirks to create a corridor of calm water that 3 ships navigated through in single file, protected by the intersection of their abilities. Aizawa was on the bridge of the second warship, soaking wet, exhausted already, and they were only 30 minutes into the storm. His capture weapon was wrapped tight around his torso in combat configuration, and his red eyes were scanning every threat his gaze could reach. He could not erase the storm. It was not a quirk in the way his eyes could affect. But he watched for the constructs, and when one dove toward his ship, he met it with his gaze, and for a moment, just a moment, the psychic energy animating it stuttered. A fraction of a second. Enough for a hero with a physical quirk to blast the thing apart while it was vulnerable. He was dripping. He was freezing. He was running on caffeine and fury and the absolute refusal to lose a single student if it was in his power to prevent. "Keep pushing," he shouted over the wind. His voice was hoarse, barely audible. It carried anyway, the way a teacher's voice always carries when it needs to. "The eye is ahead. Push through." Bakugo was in the air. He had launched from the deck of the flagship the moment the first wave hit, propelled himself upward with blasts that cracked against the psychic lightning like competing thunderstorms. The wind hit him from every direction. He was thrown sideways, spun, inverted. He compensated with more explosions, always more explosions. His palms were already raw from the previous night's training, and now they were bleeding freely, the nitroglycerin sweat mixing with blood and still igniting, still detonating, still pushing him forward and upward into the worst of it. He was not trying to get to the island. He was trying to get above the storm, because somewhere in the part of his mind that was not screaming in fury and defiance, a thought had formed. If the storm was a weapon, if it was being directed by a mind, then above it was closer to that mind. Above it was closer to the source. And getting closer to the source was the only thing he knew how to do. He punched through the cloud ceiling with a detonation that sent shockwaves rippling through the storm in both directions. Above the clouds, the sky was clear. Stars still visible in the pre-dawn darkness. The island was visible, a dark shape against the horizon, crowned by the faint violet glow of its creator. Bakugo hung there for a moment, above the storm, bleeding and burning and alive. He looked at the island, at the glow. Then he dropped back into the clouds and kept fighting. The storm lasted 4 hours this time. 4 hours of continuous assault, 4 hours of psychic lightning and weaponized waves and constructs that hunted minds the way sharks hunt blood. The fleet that emerged on the other side was battered beyond recognition. Of the original convoy, 40 vessels of various sizes carrying over 300 heroes, students, and support staff, 19 made it through. The rest had turned back, been disabled, or in 3 cases, sunk. The casualty count was still being assembled, but the number was already in the dozens. But they were through. The island rose from the calm water before them, unchanged. The same black stone, the same impossible spires, the same central tower reaching toward a sky that was clear and cold above its position. No dock. The stone platform that had received them the first time was gone, retracted into the island's face, leaving only sheer black walls rising from the waterline. No entrance visible anywhere. "He doesn't want us to land easily," Cole said. She was on the bow of the second warship, scanning the island's perimeter. Her face was focused, professional. "The whole structure is the defense now." "Then we make our own entrance," Endeavor said. He was burning bright, his flames fully realized, white-hot at their core. The seawater near him steamed. His expression was the kind of expression that moved through fury and out the other side into something colder and more useful. The assault began. Heroes hit the island from 6 points simultaneously. Flying heroes, Najira, Hawks, 3 internationals with flight capabilities, struck from above, targeting the spires and upper levels. Ground forces used quirk-enhanced grappling and climbing to scale the lower walls. Bakugo blasted his way directly through a section of exterior wall with a sustained explosion that took him and 4 other heroes into the fortress's outer corridors. The fortress fought back. The corridors shifted. Walls that had been open a moment ago sealed shut. Floors tilted at angles that sent intruders sliding toward dead ends. The stone itself moved, pressing inward, grinding closed, trying to crush anything within it like a body fighting an infection. And the clones deployed. They came from everywhere, from hidden chambers in the walls, from tubes recessed into the floors, dozens of them, each one carrying the enhanced quirk of a known hero, each one fighting with the optimized efficiency of something that felt nothing and feared nothing, and would not stop until it was destroyed. Clone Endeavor burned through corridors with fire that exceeded the original's output. Clone Hawks moved through the air with feathers that hit like bullets. Clone after clone after clone, filling the fortress with combat that was everywhere and constant and relentless. The heroes fought. They pushed. They advanced. Inch by inch, corridor by corridor, paying for every meter of progress in sweat and blood, and the growing cost of facing an army that did not tire and did not break. Meridian pushed deeper than anyone. Cole, Voss, and the other 3 moved in formation through the fortress's middle levels with the precision of people who had trained together for a decade. Cole's air barriers blocked every corridor they left behind, preventing flanking, creating safe zones, building a path through the chaos that others could follow. Voss fired from the center of the formation. His kinetic lances destroyed clones at range, invisible bolts of force that hit with the impact of artillery shells, punching through enhanced bodies with devastating efficiency. Each clone that rounded a corner in their path lasted less than a second, the other 3. A close combat specialist with a vibration quirk, a support hero who could generate localized EMP bursts, and a woman whose quirk allowed her to see 3 seconds into the future, worked in concert around the core of Voss and Cole. They were seamless. They were brutal. They were very, very good. For 20 minutes, it looked like it might work. Then the corridor ahead of them went dark. Every source of the ambient purple light that pervaded the fortress simply went out. The darkness was total, complete. Cole hardened the air around them reflexively, a defensive dome that would buy time against any physical threat. But the threat was not physical. Izuku appeared in the darkness as a pair of violet eyes. Nothing else visible, just the burning light of those eyes hanging in the black at the end of the corridor. Still. Patient. Watching. Cole saw him. Her precognitive teammate saw him 3 seconds before that. Neither warning helped. "Formation 6, Cole shouted. The team shifted instantly, defensive positions, overlapping coverage of every angle accounted for. Voss lined up a shot. The vibration specialist charged his quirk. The precog was already shouting the next 3 actions they needed to take. Voss fired. The kinetic lance, invisible, traveling at the speed of sound, hitting with force that could crack a battleship's hull. crossed the distance to Izuku's position in less than a heartbeat. It stopped, hung in the air, and fell to the ground like a spent cartridge. Cole threw barriers, dozens of them, layered, angled, creating a maze of hardened air between her team and those eyes. Each one was dense enough to stop a missile. Izuku looked at them. The barriers did not break. They simply stopped being there. The air that Cole had hardened returning to normal state as if it had never been anything else. The vibration specialist charged. He was brave. He was fast. His quirk could shake apart molecular bonds on contact. He reached Izuku's position in 2 seconds and swung with everything he had. His hand passed through empty air. Izuku was behind him. The specialist's body went rigid, every muscle locking simultaneously, and he dropped to the floor, conscious but unable to move. "Fall back," Cole shouted. Her voice was steady. Even now, even watching her team be dismantled in seconds. Formation 1, Retreat 2. The psychic pressure hit all 4 remaining Meridian members simultaneously. Not a blast, not a wave, just pressure everywhere all at once from every direction, squeezing inward with a force that made their bodies feel like they were being compressed to half their size. Voss went down first, then the EMP specialist, then the precog, whose future sight showed her nothing but darkness for the next 3 seconds, and who understood what that meant just before consciousness left her. Cole lasted longest. Her quirk kept trying to harden the air around her, kept building barriers between her body and the pressure, but each one failed the instant it formed, the air refusing to stay solid under Izuku's will. She dropped to her knees. The pressure was immense. Her vision was narrowing, but she looked up at those eyes, those burning violet eyes in the dark, and she spoke. "You're going to regret this," she said. Her voice was compressed, strained. "Not because of what we'll do to you, because of what you're doing to yourself." Izuku's expression was invisible in the dark, only the eyes were visible. But for one breath, one single breath, the pressure did not increase. Then it resumed. Cole's head bowed. Her consciousness faded. She hit the floor. The pressure released. 5 bodies lay in the corridor, unconscious but alive. Izuku floated past them without sound and moved deeper into his fortress. He had not spoken a word. Tamaki was alone. He had been separated from Mirio and Nijire in the initial breach. A shifting wall had closed between them while they were moving through the outer levels, cutting him off from both of them before he could even shout. He had tried to phase through, tried to use the octopus tentacles he'd manifested to pry the wall apart, but the stone was infused with psychic energy, and it resisted his quirk like a living thing refusing to be moved. So he went forward. Because going back was not a direction that meant anything right now. The corridors were dark. The purple light was intermittent, flickering in and out, leaving stretches of complete blackness that he had to navigate by touch and sound. His hands trailed along the walls. His breathing was too fast. His heart was too loud. He was terrified. This was not new. He was always terrified. Terror was the background frequency of his existence. The thing he woke up with and went to sleep with and carried through every waking moment like a weight sewn into his clothing. The difference between him and most people was not the absence of fear, it was the presence of something stronger. 6 years ago, a boy with blonde hair and an impossible smile had looked at him and said, "You're amazing, you know that?" That was it. That was the thing stronger than fear, not courage, not bravery. Just the memory of someone believing in him so completely that refusing to live up to it felt like betrayal. A clone appeared at the end of the corridor. Clone Kirishima. Hardened skin gleaming in the intermittent purple light. Moving toward him with the blank, efficient stride of something that felt nothing. Tamaki's hands were shaking. He manifested anyway. His right arm became a crab claw. Massive, armored, the chitin dense enough to ring like metal when he flexed it. His left grew tentacle extensions, whipping and coiling. His back sprouted the wings of a hawk, not for flight in this enclosed space, but for the stabilization they provided. He was a mess. A shifting, unstable mess of biological forms responding to a mind that was too panicked to maintain consistency. The manifestations flickered, one form bleeding into another, tentacles becoming claws, becoming scales, becoming nothing, and back again. He fought anyway. Clone Kirishima hit hard. The first blow dented Tamaki's crab claw and sent him skidding backward on the stone floor. He swung back, tentacles whipping around the clone's hardened body, looking for gaps in the crystalline armor, finding none but squeezing anyway. Applying pressure from 6 points simultaneously, the clone broke free. Charged again. Tamaki dropped low, manifested the legs of a grasshopper, and launched himself over the attack, hitting the ceiling, clinging with crystalline gecko pads, and swinging the crab claw downward at the clone's exposed back. The blow connected. Not clean, not elegant, but it connected, cracking the clone's hardening along its spine and sending it staggering forward. Tamaki followed up, dropping from the ceiling, every manifested limb striking at once in a storm of biological variety that had no pattern and no strategy, desperate animal aggression. The clone went down. Tamaki stood over it, breathing in ragged gasps, his manifestations dissolving back into normal flesh as his concentration failed. He was shaking head to toe. His legs felt like water. Another clone appeared behind him. Clone Kaminari. Electricity already crackling across its surface. He manifested again. Rubber skin, the property of an eel he'd eaten that morning, stretched across his entire body in a thin, insulating layer. The lightning hit him and slid off. He closed the distance in 3 steps and drove a mantis shrimp punch into the clone's center mass. 2 more appeared, then 3 more. He fought them all, one by one. Messy, ugly, real. Everyone cost him something. A cut here, a burn there, the growing exhaustion of maintaining manifestations that his fear kept disrupting. By the time the corridor was clear, Tamaki was on his hands and knees. His costume was torn in a dozen places. Blood ran from a cut above his eye. His arms were trembling so badly he could barely hold himself up. But the corridor was clear, and he was alive. And somewhere deeper in this fortress, Mirio needed him to be alive. He stood, he kept going, until the corridor opened into a large chamber, and floating at its center, radiant and terrible and completely still, was Izuku Midoriya. Tamaki's legs locked. Every cell in his body screamed at him to run. To hide. To stop being visible. The fear that was always present swelled to a size that should have swallowed him whole. He did not run. He manifested everything. Every protein, every chitin structure, every biological weapon he had in his system. His body became a patchwork of combat forms, armored, armed, layered in redundant defenses. It looked insane. It looked like something out of a nightmare. It was all he had. Izuku looked at him with those violet eyes, and there was nothing in them. No recognition, no interest, no cruelty. Just the flat, total attention of something that has decided you are present and will now be dealt with. Tamaki attacked. He threw everything. Claw strikes, tentacle whips, projectile quills, a spray of paralyzing venom from glands he'd manifested along his forearms. All of it launched at once from every angle, a hurricane of biological variety directed at a single point. Nothing landed. Every attack stopped in the air 3 meters from Izuku's body. Hung there, suspended, caught in the psychic field that surrounded him like an atmosphere. Then dropped to the floor. Inert. Irrelevant. Izuku raised one hand. The psychic pulse hit Tamaki like a wall of warm water, not violent, not crushing, just completely overwhelming. Every manifestation he had, active shut down simultaneously. His quirk went silent, his body snapped back to baseline human. Thin, pale, shaking, ordinary. He stood there in the center of the chamber with nothing but his own body and his own fear and his own refusal to leave. The pulse intensified, not painfully. But his muscles stopped responding, his legs gave out. He hit the floor, face down on the cold stone, conscious, aware, unable to move anything below his neck. He watched Izuku float past him, over him, away from him. Those violet eyes never looked back. The chamber echoed with the absence of footsteps. Tamaki lay there, alive, whole, unable to move, and somehow lying paralyzed on the floor of a god's fortress while that god drifted past without bothering to finish him. That was worse than dying. Because dying would have meant he mattered enough to kill. This meant he was already irrelevant. He closed his eyes and thought about Mirio's smile. He held it in his mind like a candle in a dark room, and waited. Nejira found him 12 minutes later. She came through the wall, blasting through the stone with a concentrated wave that scattered rubble across the chamber floor. Her hair was wild around her face, her costume torn, her body glowing with the blue-white energy of her quirk at full output. She looked like she had been fighting non-stop since the breach began. Because she had. Tamaki, she was beside him in seconds. Her hands on his shoulders, her waves washing over his body in a diagnostic pulse that told her everything she needed to know. He hit you with a suppression pulse. I can feel the psychic residue. Hold on, I can disrupt it if I... She directed her wave energy in a tight, focused stream along his spine. The psychic pressure holding his muscles in stasis flickered, stuttered, and released. Tamaki gasped, his whole body convulsing as motor control returned at once. She helped him sit up. Her face was close to his, worried, fierce, alive. "Are you?" "Fine," he said. His voice was hoarse. "I'm fine. Where's Mirio?" He went deeper, through the floor. I couldn't follow. The stone is too dense for my waves to break through vertically. She looked toward the far wall of the chamber. He's heading for the center, the arena. Tamaki's blood went cold. "Alone?" Nijire nodded. Her expression said what her words did not, that she had tried to follow, that the fortress had prevented it, that Mirio was beyond her reach now, moving through solid matter toward the heart of this place, toward the source of everything, and that neither of them could do a thing about it. "We have to." Tamaki started to stand. His legs buckled. Nijire caught him. "We keep going," she said. "We find another path. We get there." She pulled him to his feet, steadied him. Her waves were already building again, spiraling around her body in preparation for whatever came next. They moved. Nijire's path through the fortress was a trail of destruction. She moved through corridors like light through fiber optic cable, bouncing off walls, redirecting at angles, her waves cutting through clones and stone barriers with the same indiscriminate force. She was beautiful in motion. Every spiral of energy that left her body traced patterns in the air that caught the light of the fortress's psychic infrastructure and turned it blue. She was the brightest thing in this dark place, and she moved like she knew it. Clone after clone fell to her. She hit them with concentrated wave blasts that disrupted their cohesion, their enhanced quirks flickering and failing as her energy interfered with the psychic framework holding them together. 3 at a time. 4. A group of 5 that came around a corner and lasted less than seconds. But the fortress was vast, and for every clone she destroyed, 2 more appeared. And each one that she faced cost something. Energy, time, the finite reserves that her body burned through with every output. She was slowing down. Tamaki could see it. The slight delay between each wave, the fractional decrease in brightness, the way her breathing was getting harder, even though she would never admit it. "Go ahead," she said. They had reached a junction, corridors splitting in 3 directions. "Tamaki, go. Find another way down to the arena. I'll hold here. I'm not leaving you. You're not leaving me. You're getting to Mirio." She looked at him. Her eyes were the same as always, bright, curious, full of the energy that defined everything she was. "Go. I've got this." He went. Because she was right. Because Mirio was below them somewhere, alone, and because in the hierarchy of Tamaki's terrors, losing Mirio ranked above everything else, above his own life, above his own body, above everything. He ran, and behind him, the sound of Nijire's waves filled the corridor like music. It was another 10 minutes before she found Izuku. She was alone in a wide corridor, wider than the others, as if the fortress itself was making space for what was about to happen. Clones had stopped appearing 3 corridors back. The silence was total. Then the violet light appeared at the end of the hallway. Izuku descended from above, through the ceiling, phasing through stone the way only something that commanded the stone could. He settled into a hover at the corridor's center, 5 meters ahead of her, and looked at her with those eyes. Nijire didn't wait. Her waves hit him in a sustained beam. Not a single blast, but a continuous output. Everything she had directed at a single point. The energy spiraled as it traveled, drilling into the psychic field around Izuku's body with a rotating force that disrupted the field's uniformity. It worked. Partially. Her waves were one of the few energy types that interacted with psychic force in a meaningful way, not canceling it, but creating interference patterns, making the field fluctuate, creating windows of reduced protection. Izuku's psychic field wavered, not much, but enough that Nijire saw it and pressed harder, increasing her output, narrowing the beam, pouring everything into that point of interaction. For 3 minutes, she held him in place. 3 minutes of sustained, maximum output energy projection that should have been impossible for a human body to maintain. The corridor around them glowed white-blue from her waves and deep violet from his field, and the intersection of the two was blinding. She was making him work. Actually making him work. Not in the way that challenged his power, but in the way that demanded his attention, that required him to actively maintain his defenses, instead of letting them operate passively. She knew she could not win. Had known since before she arrived on this island. But 3 minutes bought was 3 minutes someone else had to do something that mattered. 3 minutes was a lifetime in combat. 3 minutes was enough. At 3 minutes and 4 seconds, Izuku raised his hand and issued a pulse so concentrated, so precisely targeted, that it passed through her wave output like a needle through cloth and hit her central nervous system without touching anything else. She dropped. Her waves died. Her body fell. She hit the stone floor and slid to a stop, eyes closed, face slack, every muscle in her body going limp at once. Her hair pooled around her head like a halo. She was breathing. Her heart was beating. But she was gone from the fight as completely as if she had never been in it. Izuku looked at her. He looked at her for 3 seconds. Her face on the stone. Her hair. The fading glow of her waves still clinging to her body like embers. Something in his eyes, not guilt, not mercy, not anything he would name, was present for those 3 seconds. Then he turned away and moved deeper into the fortress, toward the arena, toward what was waiting there. Mirio had been phasing for 15 minutes, straight down, through floor after floor of the fortress's structure, passing through stone like a ghost, his body intangible to everything except the air he needed to breathe. During the brief moments he surfaced to gasp before diving again. He had navigated by instinct, by the pull of something at the fortress's center that he could feel even through solid matter. He came through the arena floor. The chamber was as they had left it, massive, circular, domed. The tubes along the far wall were empty now, their green fluid drained, the cloned figures already deployed throughout the fortress. The polished floor was still cracked from the battles of the first. Mirio stood alone in the center of the arena, his body fully solid, his posture easy, his breathing even. He waited. He waited. He did not have to wait long. Izuku descended from the arena's domed ceiling the same way he always appeared, slowly floating, the violet glow preceding him like a herald. He settled into a hover at the arena's center, 10 meters from where Mirio stood. They looked at each other. "Hey," Mirio said. His voice echoed in the vast space, warm, easy, like he was greeting a friend. "Made it." Izuku said nothing. His eyes tracked Mirio with the focused attention of someone assessing a variable that does not fit existing models. Of all the heroes who had come to his island, twice now, this one was different. Izuku had reviewed every file Nezu compiled. He knew what permeation did. He knew why it was a problem. Mirio rolled his shoulders, took a breath, settled into stance. "I'm not going to give you a speech, head," he said. "You've heard enough speeches, so let's just do this." He activated his quirk and dropped through the floor. Izuku's psychic field expanded immediately, a sphere of awareness extending through the arena's stone structure, feeling for the displacement of matter that would indicate Mirio's position. There, below and to the left, moving fast through solid stone, rising, Mirio erupted from the floor behind Izuku. His fist was already swinging, solid for the fraction of a second needed to make contact, aimed at the back of Izuku's head. The psychic field caught him. Tried to. Gripped at his body with telekinetic force that would have frozen any other fighter in place. Mirio phased. The grip slid off him like oil off water. His fist completed its arc and hit Izuku's psychic barrier from the inside, from within the field, where its density was lowest. The hit landed. Not hard enough to damage, not even close, but it landed. A fist connected with the body of the most powerful being on Earth, and Izuku felt it, actually felt the impact against his skin. Izuku turned, his eyes flared. Mirio was already gone, phased back through the floor, intangible, unreachable. Again, from the right this time. Mirio came up fast, hit from inside the field, phased out before the retaliatory pulse could catch him, again from below, again from behind. Each strike was nothing, a tap, a brush, a contact that carried no real force, but each one got through. Izuku's expression shifted. Not frustration, something more interesting than frustration. Something that looked, from the outside, like a predator encountering prey that had learned a trick it had never seen before. He expanded his psychic field until it filled the entire arena. Floor, walls, ceiling, every cubic meter of space permeated with his awareness. When Mirio phased through the floor now, Izuku knew exactly where he was. When he rose toward the surface, Izuku was already there with a focused pulse aimed at the point of emergence. But the pulse passed through Mirio's intangible body without interaction. Psychic force, like physical force, needed something solid to grip, and Mirio, while phased, was as solid as smoke. He just had to become solid to hit. That was the window. That fraction of a second between intangible and tangible, between ghost and man, was where he was vulnerable. Izuku began to time it. Mirio came up. The instant he solidified, the microsecond his fist went from intangible to physical, Izuku's focused pulse hit the point where his body would be. Mirio predicted the prediction. He feinted the solidification, began the transition, drew the pulse, then rephased before it connected. His actual strike came from a different angle, a different position. Half a second later, it connected again. The fight continued like this. A chess game played at combat speed. Each move met with a counter. Each counter met with an adaptation. Mirio was talking the whole time, not taunting, not baiting, just talking the way he always talked. Open, genuine, completely himself. "You know what I learned when I lost my quirk?" he said, phasing through a pressure wave that would have crushed his skeleton. "I learned that I'm not my power." He came up behind Izuku, hit, vanished. "I learned that Mirio Togata exists with or without permeation. That who I am, the choice to be this, to do this, to stand here, that's me. The quirk is just how." Izuku said nothing, but his attacks were coming faster now, more complex. Layered pulses, area denials, attempts to create zones where Mirio could not safely surface. "The thing is," Mirio continued, dropping through the floor to avoid a pulse that carved a crater in the stone where he'd been standing, "you never got to learn that. Nobody ever gave you the chance to be anything except what your power makes you." He rose again. Hit. Vanished. "That's not fair, that's not okay, and I'm sorry." The fight had been going on for 6 minutes, an eternity against someone like Izuku. Mirio was sweating. The constant phasing took a toll, the breath management required by his quirk, pushing his lungs to their limits. But he was still going, still hitting, still refusing the mathematics of this fight. Then Izuku found the solution. He stopped trying to hit Mirio during the transition. Instead, he changed the space itself. The psychic field around his body intensified. Not outward, but creating a zone of compressed reality within arm's reach of his position. Every molecule of air, every particle of stone dust, every photon of light within that zone was under psychic pressure so intense that the space itself was hostile to anything that entered it. Mirio phased in, and for the first time, phasing was not enough. The compressed space did not need to grip him. It did not need his body to be solid. The psychic pressure existed at a level that interacted with matter regardless of its phase state. A fundamental compression of reality that his quirk had never been designed to handle. His body was inside the zone for less than a second. He phased out immediately, instinct and training overriding everything else. But that second was enough. He materialized 3 meters away. His body was wrong. The compression had done something, not visible, not external, but deep. Internal pressures that his organs were never meant to experience. He coughed and blood came with it. His legs buckled. He hit the floor on his hands and knees. Blood from his mouth spotted the polished stone. His arms were shaking, but he was looking up at Izuku, and he was smiling. "You know," Mirio said. Blood on his lip, trembling arms, that smile, that impossible, genuine, unreasonable smile. "The thing about you is that you fight like someone who has never been given a reason to stop." Izuku was still, hovering above the arena floor, looking down at this man who was broken and bleeding and smiling. "Someone should have given you a reason, a long time ago." Mirio's voice was getting weaker. His body was failing, internal damage cascading through systems that needed more help than willpower could provide. "I'm sorry they didn't." Izuku looked at him, looked at that smile, looked at the blood and the trembling and the absolute refusal to be anything other than what he was. Even here, even now, even facing something that could end him between heartbeats. The violet light in Izuku's eyes was steady, his expression was unreadable, but something was happening behind it. Something the story has not needed to name before. Something that was not mercy and not weakness, and not anything that fit within the framework he had built for himself. The psychic field intensified. The killing pressure began to build around Mirio's body. The air grew heavy. The stone beneath Mirio's hands began to crack. Mirio closed his eyes, his smile remained. The pressure built and reached the threshold where a single increment more would be fatal. It stopped. The pressure reversed. The air lightened. The stone stopped cracking. Izuku's raised hand lowered to his side. He turned away. He floated upward toward the arena's ceiling, toward the upper levels of the fortress. He did not look back. Mirio opened his eyes. He was alone in the arena. Alive. Broken, but alive. He laughed. It hurt. The motion sending fire through his damaged chest. But he laughed anyway. A small, exhausted, wondering laugh that echoed in the empty arena. "There it is," he whispered. To no one. To the boy who was already gone. "There you are." Then his arms gave out and he collapsed to the floor. And the arena was silent. Shoto found Izuku in the upper corridors. He had fought his way through the fortress with a precision that reflected every year of his training. Ice to block, fire to advance, the dual nature of his quirk deployed with the kind of fluid control that only comes from someone who has spent years reconciling two halves of themselves into a whole. The clones were below him now, destroyed or bypassed. The corridor ahead was empty, silent, lit by the fading purple glow that pulsed weaker here, as if the fortress itself was losing interest in resistance. Izuku was at the corridor's end, floating at eye level, waiting. They faced each other across 30 meters of black stone. The air between them was charged, psychic energy on one side, thermal extremes on the other. Shoto did not waste time. His right foot slammed the ground. Ice erupted, not a wall but a wave, rushing toward Izuku's position with the force of a glacier compressed into seconds. Behind it, his left side roared to life, white-hot flame that followed the ice, creating a thermal shock front where the two met. Izuku watched it come. The ice wave hit his psychic field and shattered into mist. The flame hit and curved around him, the heat bending away like light around a gravitational mass. Neither reached him. Shoto was already moving, creating ice structures that forced Izuku's field to react. Pillars, walls, geometric shapes that approached from multiple angles simultaneously, each one requiring a separate response. While the field was busy, Shoto's fire came from unpredictable angles, banking off ice surfaces, channeled through corridors he carved in real time. It was beautiful fighting, strategic and cold and passionate all at once, the ice brain and the fire heart working together the way they had always been meant to. Every attack was designed to create the next opening. Every opening was designed to make the one after it larger. Izuku dismantled it. Every layer, every strategy, but it took time. It took attention. Shoto was forcing him to think in ways that raw power alone could not address. Geometric problems, thermal dynamics, the physics of rapid state change. And while he fought, Shoto spoke. "You said something in your broadcast." His voice was steady, even as he fought, even as he created and lost and recreated his attacks in real time. About fathers who forge weapons from their children. Izuku's expression did not change. A pillar of ice approaching from his left was reduced to vapor by a focused psychic pulse. "My father did that to me." Shoto sent a wall of ice forward, 5 meters thick, dense enough to slow a freight train. Planned my existence, controlled what I was before I was born, decided I was a tool for his goal. Izuku stopped the ice wall. It hung in the air, caught by his field, held motionless between them. I spent years hating myself because of it, refusing to use half of what I was, punishing myself to punish him. Shoto's flames rose, higher, brighter, climbing up his left side until his entire body was haloed in white fire. And then someone helped me understand that what was done to me doesn't define what I choose to be, that the power is mine, not his, mine. He looked directly at Izuku, through the ice wall between them, through the psychic field, through every defense. "Your power is yours, not all for one's, yours. What you do with it is the only thing that matters now." The response was immediate. The psychic field surged, a wave of force that shattered the ice wall and everything behind it. Shoto had been ready. He'd already built a barrier of ice so dense it was nearly transparent, 50 meters of compressed frozen water between him and the impact. The ice held. For 3 seconds, it held. 3 seconds of impossibility, a human-created barrier withstanding the directed force of a psychic god. 3 seconds in which the entire corridor groaned and the walls cracked and the ceiling rained dust. Then it shattered. The fragments came from every direction. Shoto's own ice, weaponized against him by the force of the shattering, moving at speeds that left him no time to dodge and barely enough time to flinch. He was hit. From every angle, 100 impacts in the space of a breath. Shards of his own creation embedding in his costume, his skin, his guard. He went to one knee, his concentration broken, his ice manifesting weakly, his fire guttering. He looked up at Izuku. His eyes were steady. His heterochromatic gaze, half blue, half gray, held no fear. "You heard me," Shoto said. Quiet, certain. "I know you heard me." The killing pressure built, the air around Shoto compressed. His body began to bow under the weight of it, shoulders curving, spine bending, the invisible force pressing him toward the floor. His left side flared, one final time. Everything he had left, every degree of heat his body could produce, channeled into a single column of white fire that roared upward through the corridor, through the ceiling above, splitting stone and reaching for the sky with everything Shoto Todoroki was and had been, and refused to stop being. It burned. It lit the darkness. It was the last bright thing in this dark place, and it was his, and it was defiance, and it was the refusal to go quietly, and it was beautiful. Then it went out. Shoto hit the floor, face down, arms spread, his body cooling rapidly, the heat bleeding away through cracked stone, leaving him cold and still and small on the corridor floor. His chest rose, fell, rose again, barely, but moving. Izuku stood over him. The corridor was dark without Shoto's fire. Only the violet glow illuminated anything, and in that light, Izuku's face was visible. The expression on it, it was not cold, it was not controlled. It was something that lived closer to the surface than anything else the story has shown there. A tightness around the eyes, a set to the jaw, a quality of stillness that was not peace, but the active suppression of something that wanted to come out, something that looked like pain. He moved on. The corridor swallowed his light. Behind him, Shoto Todoroki breathed in the dark and did not wake, and the fortress was quieter now. Emptier. The fighting below had moved to its conclusion. Heroes falling, clones advancing, the fortress pressing its advantage against a force that had come so far and given so much, and was running out of everything except the will to continue. The central tower rose above it all, and at its top, under the open sky, was where this would end. Bakugo reached the tower roof alone. He came through the access stairwell, the last 50 meters of vertical climb in a fortress that had tried to kill him at every turn. His body was a record of everything he had been through. Burns up both arms, some from his own quirk, pushed past its safe output levels. Cuts across his torso from stone shrapnel. A gash above his right eye that had been bleeding since he entered the fortress and hadn't stopped. His costume was gone below the waist, shredded and burned away, replaced by scorched tactical leggings and boots that were held together more by habit than material integrity. His hands were the worst. The palms that were his weapon, the skin that produced the nitroglycerin sweat that fueled everything he was, were raw, cracked, bleeding in the creases. The skin was split in places where the continuous detonations had exceeded what flesh could sustain. He had fought through clones, fought through collapsing corridors, fought through the fortress's own attempts to crush him. He had not stopped once, had not rested, had not hesitated at a single turning. He stepped onto the tower roof and the night sky opened above him. Stars, wind, the dark Pacific below, stretching to every horizon. Cold air hit his burning skin, and he breathed a long, shuddering breath that carried the weight of everything he'd spent getting here. Izuku was there, standing at the tower's edge, looking out over the ocean. His back was to Bakugo. The violet glow was low, steady and contained, pulsing at his temples and fingertips. His body was unmarked, unbothered. After everything this night had thrown at him, the international heroes, the students, the coordinated assault of dozens of the world's most powerful fighters, he was exactly the same as when it started. He turned. And for the first time since the fights began, something registered on his face that was not the flat attention of a being processing threats. It was recognition. The quality of his gaze changed, focused differently on Bakugo than it had on anyone else tonight. He saw something. The file Nezu compiled. The data. But more than that, something in the way Bakugo stood. The way he held his broken body upright through nothing except refusal. The quality of his presence that was not power, was not quirk, was just the raw, undiluted force of someone who would rather die standing than live having given up. Bakugo did not wait. The explosions came immediately. Everything he had left. Both palms detonating simultaneously. Massive, sustained blasts that lit up the night sky over the Pacific in a continuous white-orange strobe. The shockwaves cracked the stone of the tower roof. The heat warped the air. The sound was constant, a roar of combustion that echoed off the ocean below. He threw it all. No pacing, no strategy, no holding anything back for later because there was no later. This was the end, and he knew it, and he chose to burn everything rather than leave anything unused. Izuku stood in the center of the storm and was untouched. Every detonation curved away, every shockwave bent around the field, the fire washed over him like water over glass, leaving nothing but the faint shimmer of displaced heat. Bakugo kept going. His palms were screaming. The nerve endings in his hands firing pain signals that his brain registered and dismissed and kept detonating through. Blood was evaporating off his skin between blasts. His vision was narrowing from exertion and blood loss. He kept going, and as the explosions raged and the sky burned and the tower shook under the force of his output, something was happening inside Katsuki Bakugo. Something that the explosions were covering. Something that the noise was hiding. Something that only became visible when his reserves finally drained and the blasts started coming weaker, smaller, further apart. He was crying. The tears were there, running down his face, cutting tracks through the blood and soot and sweat. He did not wipe them. He did not have the energy. His hands were still up, still sparking, weaker and weaker, the nitroglycerin depleting, his body reaching the absolute floor of what it could produce. He stopped. Not by choice, his body simply refused to continue. His palms sparked once more, twice, and then went dark. His arms dropped to his sides. He stood on the tower roof with empty hands and a heaving chest and tears running down his face, and he looked at Izuku Midoriya and he spoke. "You're not wrong about the system." His voice was raw, destroyed, scraped down to nothing by screaming and smoke and the hours of sustained effort that had brought him here. It's trash. It took something that was supposed to be about protecting people and turned it into a ranking, a competition, a way to sort people into useful and useless. He laughed. A single cracked sound, the laugh of someone who has reached the end of something and found it both terrible and absurd. I bought into it completely. I was the worst part of it. I made people feel like they were nothing, because that's what the system taught me value meant. Whoever was strongest was right. Whoever was on top deserved to be there. Everyone else was just beneath noticing, beneath caring about. His hands were trembling, dead at his sides, no sparks left. I don't know if there's a version of me in some other life that knew you before all this. I don't know if there's a world where we grew up together and I was the kind of kid who tormented you because you were everything the system told me didn't matter. His face contorted. The tears came harder. But I know what I am. I know what I've been. And I know that people like me, people who only understand value through power, we're the reason people like you end up in tanks. He looked at Izuku, straight at those burning violet eyes, without flinching, without looking away, without anything left to hide behind. But even trash systems produce real things sometimes, real choices, real people who actually want to protect someone. His voice cracked on the last word. He breathed through it. And I don't care if I can't beat you. I don't care if this is where it ends. I'm standing here because it's right to stand here. And that's it. That's all I've got. That's all I am. His hands dropped. His head bowed. His body swayed. Exhaustion and blood loss and the sheer emotional weight of everything he had just said pulling at him from every direction. So come on, he quiet. The quietest his voice had ever been. Do it. Or don't. But stop pretending you're doing this because you're above feeling anything. He raised his head one last time. I can see your face. The tower roof was silent. The wind, the ocean, nothing else. Izuku's eyes, the violet light in them. Steady, steady. And then something. A tremor in the glow. A flicker, like a candle in a room where a door has been opened. Something shifting deep behind the surface. Something being reached. He raised his hand. The psychic force that hit Bakugo was not a blade, not a point of lethal pressure. It was a wave, broad and blunt and irresistible, the kind that pushed rather than cut, the kind that removed rather than destroyed. Bakugo was lifted off his feet, carried backward. Over the edge of the tower, he fell. The wind rushed past him, stars above, stone beside him, the tower wall rushing upward as he dropped toward the ocean, toward the base of the island, toward the impact that his body had no reserves left to survive. The fall lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds of cold air and vertigo and the absolute certainty of ending. His hands ignited. One last time. Not because he told them to. Because they refused to stop. Because some part of Katsuki Bakugo, some fundamental, unkillable part, rejected the concept of ending so thoroughly that his body produced one more detonation when it had nothing left to give. It was not enough to fly. Just enough to slow. Just enough to turn a terminal impact into a brutal one. He hit the stone at the island's base. His body skidded, friction tearing at his remaining clothing, his skin, everything. He hit a jutting formation of rock and stopped. The impact knocked what little air remained from his lungs, and the world went gray at the edges. He was alive. He lay at the base of the tower, looking up at the sky with blood-streaked face and empty hands. His chest was heaving, every breath was a labor. But he was breathing, and he was thinking. The reader can see it in his eyes, in the way they focused on the faint violet glow at the top of the tower above him. He was thinking that he got to say it. The truth. All of it. Every ugly, honest, real piece of himself that he had spent his entire life burying beneath explosions and anger and the performance of being the best, he got to say it. And something in those violet eyes had heard it. Lying broken at the base of a fortress island in the middle of the Pacific that felt like winning something. Above him, at the edge of the tower, Izuku stood looking down. His raised hand had not lowered. He looked at Bakugo's body, small and broken and alive, for a long time. Then his hand dropped, and he turned away. The fights were over. Every hero, every student, every international operative who had come to this island tonight, all of them were down, scattered through the fortress, in corridors, in chambers on the island's exterior. Broken. Incapacitated. Some dead. All finished. The fortress was quiet. The clones had returned to dormancy, their purpose served, their empty eyes closing as they settled back into stillness. The psychic energy that had animated the stone, the corridors, the defenses, it was muted now. Low and steady, like a machine on standby, Izuku stood at the top of the central tower, looking out at the Pacific. His glow had dimmed to something barely there, a faint pulse at his temples, a trace of light at his fingertips. He was not triumphant. He was not satisfied. He had won. He always won. Every fight tonight had ended the same way. Every hero who had come at him, the strongest, the bravest, the most skilled fighters on Earth, had been put down. The gap was real. It had always been real. And standing here, at the top of his fortress, above the broken bodies of everyone who had tried to reach him, he felt... nothing? No. That was a lie. He felt something. The same thing he had felt since Mirio smiled at him with blood on his teeth, and he couldn't make himself deliver the kill. The same thing he had felt when Shoto's fire reached for the sky, and something in him recognized the gesture for what it was. The same thing he had felt when Bakugo stood with empty hands and said the truest thing anyone had said to him since he woke up. He felt it, and he could not name it, and it frightened him in ways that no physical threat ever had. Footsteps. Not running, not stumbling. Steady. Even. The steps of someone who was in pain and had decided the pain was irrelevant. The slow, measured sound of shoes on stone stairs. One step, then another, then another. Climbing the interior of the tower. Ascending toward the roof. Izuku knew who it was before the footsteps reached him. He knew the moment the mind entered his awareness, thin and exhausted and absolutely, immovably certain of what it was coming to do. Toshinori Yagi climbed onto the roof of the central tower alone. He should not have been walking. His injuries from the first visit had not healed. The medical bay had protested his discharge. The convoy leadership had tried to keep him from boarding. He had ignored all of it with the quiet, gentle stubbornness of a man who has made peace with the consequences. He was thin. Gaunt. The bones of his face visible through skin that seemed barely thick enough to cover them. His clothes were simple, dark pants, a white shirt, both soaked from the storm's spray, and hanging on his frame like they were trying to find a body to fit. His hair was limp and plastered to his skull. He looked like what he was, a dying man who had gotten up one more time. He walked to the center of the tower roof and stopped. His breathing was audible, the wet, labored sound of lungs that had been compromised years ago and never recovered. His posture was careful, the way you stand when every movement costs something. Izuku turned to face him. They looked at each other, the most powerful being alive and the skeleton of the most powerful man who ever lived. The creation and the source material, the weapon and the legacy. The night around them was vast, stars, wind, the dark ocean far below. "I asked you to leave," Izuku said. His voice was quiet, no heat in it, no threat, just a statement of fact. "I know," All Might said. His voice was thin, a thread of what it once was, but steady. "Everyone else is finished. There is no one left for you to save." "I know that too." "Then why are you here?" All Might was quiet for a moment. He looked around, at the night sky, at the stars, at the distant dark horizon where the ocean met nothing. He breathed in the salt air, let it out slowly, managing the pain in his chest that never fully left. His expression was private. Still, the expression of a man who has arrived at a place he intended to reach and is allowing himself one moment to acknowledge the fact before proceeding. "I made a mistake," he said. "A long time ago." Izuku said nothing. "I carried One for All for decades, and I was so focused on what the power was for, on being the symbol, on the mission, on what the world needed me to be, that I never thought carefully enough about what it would mean for the world I was leaving behind." He looked at Izuku. Those sunken eyes, impossible that they could still carry that much weight, fixed on the boy floating above him. "I knew the system was flawed. I saw it. The way it commodified heroism, the way it turned children into products, the way it created hierarchies that made people disposable. I saw all of it." He paused, his breath caught. He managed it, continued. "But I told myself that one person being exceptional was enough, that the symbol could substitute for something better, that if I just kept being strong enough, kept being good enough, kept standing between the world and its problems, that would be enough. That they wouldn't need to fix the system because I was holding it together." He sat down. The motion was slow, careful, every movement deliberate, the conscious decision to lower himself to the ground with whatever dignity his failing body could manage. He sat on the stone of the tower roof, legs stretched in front of him, hands in his lap, like he intended to stay a while. "Then someone used my DNA, my genetics, the physical legacy of everything I gave to the world, to make a child, to make you." His voice did not waver, and that child was kept in a box for 2 years, used as a weapon, made to kill people while his mind was locked away, and he suffered things that no living being should suffer, in a system that I helped maintain, under a shadow that I failed to eliminate. He looked up at Izuku, way up, because Izuku had risen without meaning to, the psychic energy lifting him in response to the intensity of what he was hearing. "I bear responsibility for that. Not because I made you, but because the world I helped build, the world I protected instead of changing, made it possible for someone like All for One to make you and use you and throw you away." The wind moved between them, cold, carrying salt from the ocean below. "I came here to tell you something," All Might said. "Not to fight, not to save anyone. Those things are past me now. I can't fight anymore, and there's no one left to save." He let that sit. Then, "I came to tell you something, face to face as the person responsible." He looked at Izuku, straight at him, without defense or distance or anything except himself, Toshinori Yagi, stripped of every title and every power and every version of himself that had ever been more than human. "I see you, Izuku Midoriya. I know your name. I know what was done to you, and I am sorry." The words sat in the air, present, real, unchangeable. "You said that before," Izuku said. His voice was careful, controlled, but something in it, some quality of its edge, was different than it had been at the start of this night. Less certain, more like something being held together by effort alone. In the arena. "I mean it more now," All Might said. "I've had time to think about all of it." He paused. His hand moved to his chest, an unconscious gesture touching the place where his wound never fully closed. "You know what I kept thinking about, lying in that medical bay? I kept thinking about the fact that you were made from All Might, from what I was, from my best cells, my strongest expression. His hand dropped. His eyes stayed on Izuku. And what that became, what that was forced to become, is the greatest indictment of my legacy that has ever existed. Everything I built, everything I stood for, everything I told the world about what heroism meant, and the proof of its failure is you. A child made from my strongest self, turned into a weapon and kept in the dark. The violet glow around Izuku's body intensified, the air on the tower roof charged with psychic energy. The pressure rose, subtle but present, the unconscious output of a mind under stress. "Don't," Izuku said. His voice had changed again, something in it now that sounded almost like a warning, but not the kind that threatens violence. The kind that asks someone to stop approaching a wound that is too raw to touch. Don't come here and make this about your guilt. Don't make this a redemption story for you. It isn't, All Might said, immediately, without hesitation. It is for you. All of this is for you. He stood. Slowly, with effort that was visible in every joint and every breath. His body was shaking, the fine, constant tremor of muscles pushed past their limits. His spine protested, his lungs complained. Everything in his body said, stay down. He stood anyway. You've been asking a question since before you could speak. Since you were hanging in that tank in the dark. I heard it in your broadcast. I heard it in everything you've done since you woke up, in the fortress, in the storm, in every person you've put down tonight. Izuku was very still. His glow was intensifying, but his body was not moving. The contrast was wrong, like a glass being filled to the rim without anyone watching how close it was to overflowing. Who am I? All Might said. That's the question, isn't it? The air cracked. The stone of the tower roof fractured, a starburst pattern radiating from the point directly below Izuku's hovering body. The psychic energy in the atmosphere spiked to a level that made the air itself visible. Purple light flooding the night sky in a column that mirrored the one that had appeared over Yokohama when everything began. The ocean below churned. The clouds, which had been still since the storm ended, began to rotate around the column of light. Stop. Izuku's voice was shaking. The first time, the absolute first time his voice had shaken. Stop talking. You are not a weapon, All Might said. He took a step forward. His body shook with the effort. The psychic energy radiating off Izuku was pressing against him like a physical force. The air thick with it, the pressure increasing with every word. He took the step anyway. You are not a specimen. Specimen. You are not All for One's masterpiece or my legacy's failure or Mewtwo reborn or the ultimate life form. Another step. The pressure increased. All Might's clothes pressed flat against his body from the force of it. His hair streamed backward. His feet skidded slightly on the cracked stone. He did not stop. You are a boy who was hurt before he had a chance to be anything else. Another step. He was close now. The violet light was blinding at this distance, burning against his skin with an intensity that would have stopped anyone else. That should have stopped him. That stopped meaning anything the moment he decided it would not. And the things you have done since you woke up, the rage, the fortress, the broadcast, the deaths, all of it. The pressure spiked. All Might staggered. His knees almost gave. He caught himself. Stood straight again. Blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. Not from an impact, but from internal strain, from a body being subjected to forces it could not sustain. He did not stop, is all the cry of someone who needed someone to see them. He was one step away, one step from Izuku's hovering form, close enough that the psychic energy was visible as a physical barrier between them, a wall of violet light that shimmered and pulsed and pushed against his thin body with the force of something that did not want to be breached. He took the last step, into the light, through it, let it press against him and burn against him and push at him from every direction. I see you, All Might said. His voice was barely a whisper now, lost in the roar of psychic energy around them, but clear, steady, absolute. I see Izuku Midoriya. The column of light above the tower was blinding now, a pillar of violet and white that split the night sky from ocean to stars. Below, on the ship's holding position outside the island's perimeter, every person still conscious was looking up at it, not breathing, not moving, just watching. Izuku's eyes were blazing. Every scar on his body was lit from within by the psychic energy coursing through him. His hands were open at his sides, fingers splayed, energy bleeding off his skin in waves that made the air bend and the light refract and reality itself feel thin at the edges. You cannot fix this with words. His voice was cracking, not from anger, not from rage, from something beneath both of those. Something older and deeper and more fragile than anything the armor of his power had ever needed to protect. You cannot say the right thing and make 2 years in a box disappear. You cannot say the right thing and give back the people I killed. You cannot. His voice broke. The sentence stopped. His face, his young face, his freckled face, the face of a boy who had never been given the chance to be a boy, contorted with something that was trying to come out and being held back by 2 lifetimes of learning, that letting things out only led to being hurt. I know, All Might said. Gentle, so gentle. The voice of a man who has nothing left except the truth and is offering all of it. I know I can't fix it. I'm not here to fix it. He extended his hand, open palm, fingers relaxed, offering nothing except the gesture itself, the choice, the invitation. I'm here because you needed someone to come to you, not to fight you, not to stop you, just to see you. Izuku's eyes were fixed on that hand. The violet light in them was flickering, rapid, unstable, the psychic equivalent of hyperventilation. The control that had been his armor since the moment he woke up was cracking, hairline fractures running through it, spreading. And to tell you, All Might continued, that what happens next is yours. Whoever you decide to be, whatever you do with the rest of your life, that is yours. No one can take that from you. Not All for One. Not the system. Not me. His hand stayed where it was, open, waiting, patient in the way that only something truly offered can be patient, without expectation, without demand, without the transaction that turns a gift into a leash. Izuku's hand rose. It was the slowest movement he had made since his awakening. His body, capable of reshaping geography, of crossing hundreds of kilometers in an instant, of dismantling the strongest fighters alive without effort, moved his hand toward All Might's at the speed of someone reaching across an abyss they have been staring into for 2 lifetimes. His fingers trembled. The violet glow on his skin pulsed with each heartbeat, rapid, unsteady, the internal turbulence visible in every shift of light, and the psychic energy in the air reacted. The column of light above the tower intensified, a final flare of violet and white that illuminated the entire Pacific horizon, visible from 100 kilometers in every direction. The clouds rotated faster. The ocean below surged. The air itself vibrated with a frequency that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then something happened that had never happened before. The energy turned inward. Instead of radiating outward, instead of the wave of force that every previous emotional spike had produced, the psychic energy imploded, collapsed back toward its source, toward Izuku. Like a star going supernova in reverse, all that light and all that force rushing back into the single point of its origin, the backlash was instant. The compression of that much energy into a single body, even a body designed to contain it, produced a shockwave at the point of collapse. A sphere of displaced air expanding outward from Izuku's position at a speed that nothing on the tower roof could resist. All Might was thrown off his feet. His thin body caught the full force of the shockwave and flew backward across the tower roof. He hit the low wall at the edge, the barrier between the roof and the 300-meter drop, and his body folded over it. The impact was audible. Something cracked. He did not move. And Izuku, the energy that turned inward, did not return cleanly. It hit him the way every suppressed thing hits when it finally breaks through. All at once. Total, undeniable. The psychic force that had been directed outward for weeks, at enemies, at clones, at fortresses and storms and the physical world itself, turned on the mind that generated it and delivered, in a single crushing instant, everything that mind had been refusing to feel. Every death, every hero whose body had hit the floor tonight because his hand moved and their life ended, every face, every sound, every person who had been alive and full and real and was now broken or gone because of something he chose to do, every death from before tonight, the 2 years of deployment, the 47 bodies compressed in Osaka, the resistance cell in Deku City, the hero agency in Yokohama, every person whose life had been ended by his hands while his mind was locked away, but whose death he had still felt, still experienced, still carried in the part of himself that never fully went dark. 2 years of horror, delivered in a single instant to a consciousness that had been trying to weaponize the pain instead of feeling it. He fell. Not gently, not the controlled descent of a being in command of gravity. He dropped, straight down, 3 meters, and hit the stone of the tower roof with his knees. The impact cracked the stone beneath him. His hands slammed down next, palms flat against the cold surface. The violet glow went out. All of it. Every trace of the psychic illumination that had surrounded his body since the moment he woke up. Gone. Like a light switch thrown, like a fire doused. In its absence, the night was dark, truly dark, just starlight and ocean and the distant running lights of ships on the horizon. And in that dark, on the cracked roof of a tower he had built from rage and ocean stone, Izuku Midoriya was on his knees with his hands pressed flat and his head bowed, and he was crying. Not the contained tears that had fallen in the sky over Yokohama, not the controlled grief of someone processing loss from a distance. These were different. These were the full-body, sound-making, ugly crying of someone who has been holding something for so long that the act of releasing it is indistinguishable from being torn apart. He made sounds that were not words. Raw, cracked sounds that came from somewhere deeper than his throat, from his chest, from his stomach, from the place where 2 lifetimes of isolation and pain and the desperate need to matter had been compressed into something small and hard and now was breaking apart into everything it had always been. And then words came, and they were not declarations, not philosophy, not challenges to the world or statements of power or the cold, controlled speech of a being above emotion. They were the words of a child. I didn't want to hurt them. His voice was small, broken. The voice of someone who is 16 years old and has been denied every single year of it. I didn't want any of it. I was in there. I was inside, and I could feel them dying, and I couldn't stop it. And I tried to move, tried to scream, tried to do anything, and I couldn't. His body curled, forehead touching the stone, hands pulling into fists against the ground. The sounds that came from him were not sustainable. They were the kind of sounds that empty a person out and leave them lighter on the other side. He cried for the heroes he killed in Yokohama while his body obeyed commands his mind never gave. He cried for the resistance cell in Deku City, 40 people who thought they were fighting evil and died at the hands of someone who agreed with them. He cried for the 2 years of darkness, of floating in that tank, of being conscious just enough to know he was being used and not conscious enough to stop it. He cried for Mewtwo, for the first life, for the laboratory and the rage and the beautiful, fragile moment of understanding before the end, for the peace he had found and lost, for the hope that maybe this time it would be different. It was not different. It was the same cage, the same question, the same pain with a different shape. He cried until there was nothing left to come out, until his body was still and his face was pressed against the cold stone, and the only sound was his breathing, ragged, exhausted, the breathing of someone who has just survived something worse than any fight. All might moved, against every physical limitation, against the cracked rib and the bruised spine and the lungs that protested every breath, against the cold and the pain and the absolute insistence of his body that he stay down. He moved, slowly, with the kind of will that has no relationship to physical strength, the will of a man who has been getting back up for 30 years and cannot stop now because the habit of it is deeper than his bones. He crawled to the first, then got his knees under him, then his feet. He crossed the tower roof at the speed of someone whose body is a failing machine being operated by an unbreakable mind. He reached Izuku. He lowered himself to the ground beside him. The motion was graceless and painful, and the most important thing he had ever done. He sat. He put his hand on the boy's shoulder. He did not say anything. There was nothing left to say. The words were done. The speeches were done. The arguments and the challenges and the grand statements about heroism and systems and what things mean, all of it was done. This was what was left. An old man sitting on cold stone in the dark with his hand on the shoulder of a crying boy. The simplest thing in the world. The thing that should have happened 2 years ago. 5 years ago. At the beginning, before any of this, before the tank and the suit and the fortress and the killing, someone should have sat down beside Izuku Midoriya and put their hand on his shoulder and stayed. So that is what Toshinori Yagi did. He stayed. The crying subsided, not quickly, in waves, receding and receding further each time. Izuku's breathing evened, his body uncurled, slowly. The way a fist uncurled the thing it was holding has been set down, he did not speak. All Might did not speak. They sat together on the tower roof while the night aged and the stars turned and the ocean below was dark and patient and unconcerned with the affairs of the people above it. Below, on the ships that had survived the storm and held position throughout the night, Uraraka was watching the light. It had gone soft. The blinding column was gone, replaced by nothing at first, then by a faint, low glow that appeared on the tower roof after the darkness. Gentle, pulsing. Like a heartbeat returning to rhythm after a crisis, she was watching it with tears running down her face and a certainty she could not explain and did not need to. "It's happening," she said, to Aizawa beside her, to the night, to herself. "He's letting it happen." Aizawa looked at the glow. He said nothing, but his posture, the slight release of his shoulders, the way his hand unclenched from the railing it had been gripping, said what he would not. Morning came. The light on the tower roof had faded completely by the time the sun appeared on the eastern horizon. The sea was flat and calm, no trace of the storm that had raged through the night. The sky was clear, blue, clean in the way that the world sometimes is after violence, as if the atmosphere itself has been washed. The fortress was silent, no hum in the walls, no violet light in the corridors. The stone that had been animated by psychic energy for weeks was just stone now. Dark and cold and still, a boat was sent. Small. The kind that could navigate close to the island's base without a dock. 3 people aboard. Uraraka, Aizawa, Nezu. Nezu was himself again. Fully recovered from the brainwashing, the blankness gone from his eyes, and replaced by an intelligence so sharp it was almost painful to look at directly. He had spent the night in the ship's communication center, processing information at a speed that left the human staff unable to follow. He understood what had happened. He understood what it meant, and he carried the guilt of his unwilling participation in every precise movement of his small body. They docked at the island's base, a natural ledge of stone, unworked, just rock meeting water the way rock meets water everywhere. They climbed, through corridors that no longer shifted, past chambers that held only the shells of cloning tubes, drained and empty. Upstairs that were just stairs now. They found people on the way up. Heroes and students lying where they had fallen, unconscious, injured, some only now beginning to stir. Medical teams would follow. For now, Aizawa noted positions and conditions and kept moving. They reached the tower roof. All Might was sitting against the low wall at the edge. His back to the sky, his legs stretched in front of him, his eyes were closed. His breathing was shallow. The thin, regular rhythm of someone in the space between consciousness and sleep. His face was peaceful. More than peaceful. There was something in the lines of it, in the relaxation of muscles that had been carrying tension for decades, that looked like completion. Beside him, 5 meters away, Izuku was sitting with his knees pulled to his chest, his arms wrapped around them, his chin resting on his crossed wrists. He was looking out at the ocean. At the sunrise, painting the water gold and orange, his glow was gone, his body was just a body. Young, thin, scarred from the suit's interior mechanisms. His green hair was messy and salt-stiff from the ocean air. He looked like what he was, a 16-year-old boy sitting in the morning light, looking at the sea. Aizawa moved to All Might, checked him. His expression was tight, professional concern masking personal relief. The old man was alive, badly off, dehydrated, hypothermic, his injuries from tonight layered on top of injuries from last week, but alive. His breathing continued, steady, present. Uraraka walked toward Izuku. She did not run. She moved at the pace of someone approaching something that deserves respect. Not because it is dangerous, but because it is fragile. She sat down in front of him, cross-legged. Her own body was exhausted. The night on the ship, the hours of watching and waiting, the emotional weight of everything, but she was here. She was present. That was enough. Izuku looked up from the ocean. His eyes met hers. Green. Just green. Young and tired and real in a way that nothing about him had been real before this morning. The violet was gone. Not suppressed, not hidden, just absent, as if whatever had been burning behind his eyes had finally settled into something that didn't need to announce itself. "I don't know how to stop," he said. His voice was raw, stripped of every layer that had been on it since he woke up. No control, no cold, no distance, just a voice, a boy's voice. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. I was built to destroy. That's all I know. Every memory I have from this life and the one before, it ends in destruction. In isolation, in the question." "What question?" Uraraka asked, gently, the way you ask someone to say the thing they need to say. "Who am I? What am I for?" She was quiet for a moment. The sun rose higher. The light on the water shifted from gold to white. The morning was warm, and it reached them here on this tower roof and touched them with the same indifferent warmth it gave to everything. "Those are the same questions everyone asks," she said. "They're just louder for you." He looked at her. Something moved in his expression, the ghost of something that might have been surprise, as if the idea that other people carried the same uncertainty he did had never occurred to him before. "The people who died," he said, "tonight. Yes, I did that. Yes." She did not flinch, did not soften, did not look away. "You did. I can't undo it." "No." The silence between them was long, full, honest in the way that only silence between people who have stopped performing can be honest. The sun continued to rise. The sea was calm. The world continued. "The clones," Aizawa said from behind Uraraka. He had been standing at the tower entrance, watching. His voice was hoarse, exhausted, but steady. The voice of a teacher who has been awake all night and still has things that need to be said. "Release them. Whatever you've built in this fortress, the machinery, the army, the infrastructure, let it go." Izuku looked at him, then looked around, at the fortress, at the stone, at what he had made it into. A weapon, a fortress, an island kingdom for a war that he built because rage was the only blueprint he had. He had pulled this from the ocean floor and shaped it with his grief and called it home, and it had never been home. It had been a barricade, a wall between himself and the world. A declaration that he did not need what the world offered because the world had only ever offered cages. He closed his eyes and let go. The island shuddered. Deep in its interior, far below them, in the chambers and corridors and infrastructure that had served his war, things began to stop. The cloning machinery wound down. Its hum, audible only as a background vibration in the stone, faded. The tubes drained. The genetic material within them dissolved, programmed obsolescence activating without the psychic framework to hold it stable. The monitoring equipment went dark. The communications array fell silent. One by one, the systems that had made this place a threat simply ceased to be. The psychic energy that had suffused every stone since Izuku raised this place from the ocean floor, the invisible architecture that held impossible shapes in place and gave the fortress its alien geometry, began to release. Without it, the stone was just stone, and stone pulled from the deep ocean floor had no business being 300 meters above the waterline. The spires began to crumble, slowly, gently. Not the violent collapse of a building being destroyed, but the natural settling of something returning to a shape that physics preferred. Stone flaked from the highest points and fell into the sea below in long, graceful arcs. The fortress was not falling, it was letting go. "We need to move," Nezu said. His voice was careful. He was watching the tower beneath their feet, watching for the structural compromise that would make this position unsafe. "This platform has perhaps 20 minutes before the supports beneath us lose cohesion." Izuku opened his eyes. He looked at All Might, still sitting against the wall, still unconscious, still breathing with that thin, steady rhythm. He stood, crossed the tower roof, looked down at this man, this thin, old, broken man, who had walked unarmed to the top of a god's fortress, who had sat down beside the most dangerous being alive and put his hand on his shoulder, who had said his name, just his name, nothing more, and meant it in a way that no one in 2 lifetimes ever had. Izuku lifted him with his hands. Not telekinesis, his actual hands, carefully, gently, supporting the weight of All Might's frail body with a tenderness that came from somewhere he had not accessed before tonight. He floated off the tower roof as the stone began to soften beneath his feet. He carried All Might off the island, over the dark water where the fortress was slowly, peacefully returning to the sea, and set him down on the deck of the nearest ship. He did not land. He hovered above the deck, a meter above the surface, and looked at the faces of the people watching him. Heroes, students, support staff, medical teams. They stared up at him from the deck of the ship with expressions that contained everything a human face can contain: fear, confusion, anger, grief, and something else. Something that had not been there 12 hours ago. Something that looked almost like uncertainty about what he was. Now that the violet light was gone and the fortress was sinking and the boy above them looked like a boy and nothing more, he looked at all of them. "I don't have a speech," he said. His voice was quiet. It carried anyway. The air still moved for him, out of habit or instinct or some connection between his will and the world that would never fully sever. "I know what I've done. I know what I've cost." He paused. The morning light was warm on his scarred skin. Behind him, a spire of the fortress collapsed into the Pacific with a distant rumble and a fountain of white water. "I don't know who I am yet, but I know I'm done deciding that question with other people's lives." He looked down at All Might, lying on the deck beneath him. The old man's face was still peaceful, still carrying that expression of something completed. "He told me my name," Izuku said. "Nobody has ever just told me my name before." Below him, standing among the gathered crowd on the deck, Uraraka made a sound that was half laugh and half sob and was probably both. Her hand was over her mouth and her eyes were bright and the tears on her cheeks caught the sunrise. Izuku looked at her, at Aizawa. At the faces he could see behind them. Kirishima, bandaged, leaning on someone for support. Kaminari, barely conscious, propped against a bulkhead. Others, all of them watching. All of them alive and present and real. He rose higher. The deck fell away below him. The ship, the water, the sinking island. He turned east toward the open Pacific. And he flew. The island continued to sink through the morning. By noon, only the top 30 meters of the central tower remained above water. Its shape was wrong now. The crisp geometric lines softened by the loss of the psychic framework that had held them. It looked less like a fortress and more like what it was. A pillar of deep ocean basalt, out of place, finding its way back where it belonged. By evening, it was gone. Just a patch of disturbed water, foam and bubbles and displaced sediment marking where a fortress had stood and a war had ended and a boy had broken apart and begun to put himself back together. By the next morning, even that was gone. Just ocean, flat and silver and infinite. Indifferent, the convoy sailed home, slower this time, no storm to fight through, no urgency driving them forward. Just the long, quiet journey of people returning from something that changed them permanently. The dead were counted, not in a list, in absences. A seat at the briefing table that no one sat in because the hero who used to sit there, a woman from the European contingent, 34 years old, mother of 2, had been in one of the corridors when a clone found her. And her barrier quirk was not enough. Her team packed her equipment in silence. Someone folded her spare costume and placed it in a container and could not look at it while they did. A message sent to a family in Sapporo that changed everything about their morning. Their son, a third year from another hero school, volunteered for the assault, 20 years old, just 20, had been in the storm. One of the 12 who didn't make it off the support vessel, a name read at a memorial that was not yet planned but was already inevitable. Another name. Another. The weight of each one specific and personal and irreducible to statistics. Bakugo was in a hospital bed. His arms were wrapped in medical bandages from wrist to shoulder. The burns and the raw skin and the cracked flesh of his palms all being treated with the best regenerative medicine available. It would heal. The doctors said so. Full recovery within weeks. He was awake. Had been awake for hours. Had not asked for anything. Not food, not water, not company. He was looking at the ceiling with an expression that was not peace and not grief. Something between them. Something after them. The framework was gone. The one he had built everything on. Strongest, best, top. The hierarchy that told him who he was by telling him who was beneath him. It was gone. Not destroyed in a single moment, but dissolved over the course of a night on an island in the Pacific, where he stood with empty hands in front of something infinite and said true things and survived. He did not know what replaced it yet. The space where the framework used to be was empty, and that emptiness was frightening in ways he did not have vocabulary for. But it was also, and this was the part he kept returning to, kept prodding like a loose tooth. It was also possible. The emptiness was possible. It could become something he chose, something that was not given to him by a system that valued power above everything. He just didn't know what yet. There was a knock at his door. He turned his head, didn't say come in, didn't say go away, just turned and looked. Todoroki was standing in the doorway, hospital gown. One arm in a sling, burns on the right side of his face that would scar. His heterochromatic eyes were steady, present. Bakugo looked at him. Todoroki looked back. You said things, Todoroki said. On the tower, to him. Yeah, I heard about it, from the ships. A pause. People could hear you. Bakugo's jaw tightened. Something hot moved across his face, the instinct to deflect, to snarl, to rebuild the walls. It passed. There was nothing left to build them with. Good, he said. Todoroki nodded. He stood in the doorway a moment longer. Then he walked in and sat in the chair beside the bed without being invited. He did not say anything else. He just sat there. Bakugo went back to looking at the ceiling. After a while, minutes, maybe longer, his hand moved, just slightly, just enough to cross the space between the bed rail and the chair beside it. His bandaged fingers rested on the armrest of Todoroki's chair, not touching Todoroki, just near. Todoroki's hand moved too, settled beside Bakugo's on the armrest, close, not touching. They stayed like that, in silence, in the proximity of two people who have been through something that words cannot carry and are choosing to be near each other anyway. It was enough. Down the hall, in another room, Shoto's father stood in a doorway of his own. Endeavor was bandaged, burned in places that should not have burned. His own fire reflected back at him by the clone's superior output. His flame beard was out. His eyes were tired in a way they had never been in public. He stood in the doorway of Shoto's room, the room Shoto had been brought to after recovery, the room where he had woken too early and been awake ever since, and he did not enter. Shoto was looking at the wall, knew his father was there, had known for a full minute. Let the silence sit. Endeavor's hands were at his sides. Uncharacteristically uncertain, the confident posture that defined his public existence, the squared shoulders, the forward lean, the flame and fury, was absent. What remained was a large man in a doorway who did not know if he had the right to cross the threshold into his son's space. Shoto looked at the doorway, at his father. The beat lasted a long time, long enough for Endeavor to feel the weight of it. Long enough for years of burning dinners and training bruises and a mother in a hospital to be present in the air between them. Then Shoto nodded. Once, Endeavor entered, sat in the chair. His large frame made it look small. He sat with his hands on his knees and his head slightly bowed, and he said something. It was not the right thing. There was no right thing. What he said was imperfect and too late and not enough and genuine in a way that hurt more than cruelty would have. Something about being sorry that was too simple and too true and carried no expectation of being forgiven. Shoto listened. He did not forgive. But he nodded again, a second time, and that was something. A crack in a wall. Not a door, but a crack. And cracks were where light got through. Mirio woke up to warmth on both sides. His body hurt. Deep internal pain that spoke to injuries that would take real time and real rest to heal. His chest ached with every breath. His arms felt wrong in ways he couldn't pin down. But there was warmth on his left side, and warmth on his right. And when he opened his eyes, Tamaki was there, head resting against the edge of Mirio's hospital bed, dark hair falling across his face, eyes closed but not asleep. On the other side, Nijire, curled in a chair that was too small for her feet tucked beneath her hand resting on the bed near Mirio's. They had been here a while. Their positions spoke to hours of waiting, hours of watching a monitor, hours of not leaving. Mirio tried to smile. It worked. Barely, his facial muscles stiff and slow, but it worked. Hey, he said. His voice was a wreck. Tamaki's eyes opened instantly. The speed of it, the immediate total alertness, said everything about how lightly he had been sleeping, how ready he had been for this exact moment. He looked at Mirio. His face crumbled. All the composure he'd been holding through the fortress, through the corridors, through the hours of waiting, dissolved at once. His eyes filled, his mouth worked, no sound came out. Mirio tried to make a joke, something about hospital food, something light and easy and normal, It landed badly because Tamaki was already crying silently, his shoulders shaking, his hand reaching for Mirio's and finding it and gripping with a strength that came from a place deeper than his quirk. Mirio stopped trying to make a joke. He put his arm around Tamaki, the motion costing him in pain, every muscle protesting, but his arm moved anyway because this was more important than comfort. He pulled Tamaki close and let him cry against his shoulder and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that this was not already saying. On the other side, Nejire had woken. She was watching them with eyes that were bright and wet and smiling in a way that was all tenderness and all grief and all gratitude at once. She put her hand on Mirio's, on top of Tamaki's, 3 hands stacked together on a hospital bed in the early morning. That was enough. That was everything. All Might woke on the 3rd day. The intensive care unit at UA's medical facility was quiet. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. The IV dripped. The morning light came through the window and lay across the bed in pale rectangles. His eyes opened, slowly, blinking against the light. The ceiling above him was white, familiar. He had been in this room before, after Camino, after his final fight, after every time his body decided to remind him that it was running on borrowed time. He was alive. The fact of it settled over him like warmth. He breathed, and it hurt, but it was his breath, and he was having it, and that was remarkable. A nurse appeared, asked questions. He answered, his voice a thread, barely audible, but coherent. He was stable. He was conscious, against every reasonable expectation of a body that had been pushed past its limits repeatedly over the span of a week. He was here. The first thing he said after the nurse's questions were answered was a name. Izuku. Not a question, not an accusation, just the name. Said with the weight of someone confirming something they already knew, confirming that the name was real, that the boy who carried it was real, that what had happened on the tower roof had happened and was not a dream. The nurse told him the boy was not there. Had left, had flown east over the Pacific after the island sank and had not been seen since. All Might nodded. He expected that. He'll figure it out, he said. His voice was the thinnest thing, barely more than air shaped into words. But there was something in it. Something that sounded like the certainty of a man who has placed his bet and is at peace with the outcome regardless of the number that comes up. He has the right question now. He'll find the answer. He closed his eyes, breathed, slept again. Outside the window, the campus was quiet, recovering, grief-struck but present, continuing the way the world always continues, because the alternative is stopping. And stopping has never been something the living know how to do for long. Izuku was not in custody. No one had attempted to detain him. This was not a matter of will. The Hero Commission had discussed it at length, as had the international agencies and the various governmental bodies whose jurisdiction theoretically covered the situation. They had discussed it and reached the same conclusion from every angle. They could not hold him. Any attempt to restrain, capture, or contain Izuku Midoriya would either fail or trigger a response that no one wanted to trigger. The choice was between attempting control and accepting uncertainty. They chose uncertainty. It was not a comfortable choice, but it was the only honest one. He was somewhere over the Pacific, moving slowly, no destination, just moving. The ocean below was vast and dark. He flew at an altitude where the air was thin and cold and the curve of the earth was visible at the horizon. Below him, clouds formed and dissolved. Above him, the sky deepened toward the blue-black of space. For the first time since his awakening, for the first time in this life, his mind was not full. No rage, no grief, no cold clarity, no mission, no plan, no declaration about the world or his place in it, just space, room. The strange, frightening, tentative openness of a mind that has been clenched for so long that unclenching feels like falling. He thought about the memories from his first life, the laboratory, the creation, the rage that had consumed everything, the battle, the clone army, the tears of a boy, a child, younger than Izuku was now, who had run into the space between two forces that could have destroyed him and stopped everything by being willing to be destroyed. That boy, that stupid, brave, impossibly young boy who looked at two gods fighting and decided that the answer was to put his body between them. All Might had done the same thing, walked up a tower, stood between Izuku and his rage, said his name, sat down. Uraraka had done it too, in her way. looked at him and said he was crying when everyone else saw a threat. The pattern was the same in both lives. Across the gap between worlds and species and everything that made this existence different from the last, the answer was always someone refusing to fight. He thought about that, let it sit, did not rush it, and he thought about what came after. In that first life, after the battle and the tears and the understanding, there had been peace, brief and fragile and beautiful. The decision that existence itself was enough, that being alive was its own meaning. Regardless of how that life began or what it was made for, he had found that once, in another body, in another world. Maybe he could find it again. Maybe finding it was the work of the rest of his life. He stopped, hovered. The Pacific stretched to every horizon. No land, no ships, no human presence anywhere. Just water and sky and the thin line between them. He opened his hands at his sides, let the energy flow. Not a weapon, not a display, just release. The psychic force that lived in every cell of his body, bleeding outward from his palms in slow, curling patterns that had no purpose and no target and no meaning except their own existence. The energy spiraled, it caught the afternoon light, refracting it in ways that had no functional reason. Violet and blue and something that was almost green, curling upward through the air in shapes that looked like nothing and like everything, like the way water moves when it is not being directed, like the way fire looks when it is not burning anything, like the way light behaves when there is nothing to illuminate except itself. It was beautiful. Just beautiful. Energy doing something beautiful because he allowed it to. He watched it for a long time. His face, lit by his own light, held an expression that was not a smile. Not yet, but something adjacent to it, something that lived in the same neighborhood and might, with time and work and the painful daily choice to keep going, find its way next door. He closed his hands. The light faded. The air was just air again. He started moving, east, toward Japan. Not fast. Not with urgency or purpose or the driving momentum of someone going to war. Just toward it, toward the place where people were, where the world was, where things would be hard and complicated and full of consequences he would have to carry, toward. And somewhere behind him and below him and connected to him by nothing except the thread of a night shared on a tower roof in the dark. Toshinori Yagi was asleep in a hospital bed with a ghost of a smile on his ruined face, the kind of smile that lives on people who have done the one thing they were put here to do. And somewhere in a dorm room at UA, in a building that was quiet with recovery but not quiet with grief, busy with the specific energy of people who have survived something and are beginning to figure out what survival means, Ochako Uraraka was at her desk, writing. Her lamp was on. Her notebook was open. The pen moved across the page with the certainty of someone who has found the thing they needed to say. And this time, the words on the page did not sound like fear, did not sound like uncertainty or grief or the desperate processing of someone trying to make sense of too much too fast. They sounded like the beginning of something. I think he'll come back. Not because he has to, not because anyone is making him, because he chose to. And that's the difference. That's everything. The choice. The choice is the whole thing. She closed the notebook, set down the pen, looked out the window at the evening sky, clear, calm, purple at its edges as the sun dipped below the horizon. She smiled, and somewhere over the Pacific, moving east, moving toward, Izuku Midoriya was alone with the sky and the ocean and the vast, open, terrifying freedom of a life that belonged to no one except himself. He spoke, one line, to no one. To the air, to the question that had lived in him for 2 lifetimes and was not answered, would never be fully answered because that was the nature of it, because the answering was the living, and the living was the point. I am what I choose to be next.
The Hero Roster. A massive salute to the legends backing this journey. Your support is what keeps the momentum at an all-time high and the dream moving forward. You guys are the absolute best. Pro heroes, the elite front line, stepping up and setting the pace for the whole community. DA, Fire 05.
Symbol of peace, the pillars of the community. The titans who keep our foundation solid and the hype at an all-time high. Michael Worthy, Grand Regent KL, Sin Hunter, Deshaun Jones, Logan Bland, Alexander Johannes, Alex Morgan, Ray Various, Blaze, that other guy too, Chad Reynolds, Zakaria Allison, T-Maki 68 Rimu, Nua, Kelvin Bowman, AZ00 Trees, Dweller of the Deepest Depths, Lone Wolf, The Lone One, Jacob Rops, Bully Maguire Shadow, Amiri B, Neostar Productions, Asael Cardenas, Shaquan Simmons, Thunder, Tsunawan 631, Elijah Saunders, Peter Hamilton, Freddie Rose, Omega, Akuma Noakami, Chris Talley, Remorsefuls, Black Vein, Joshua Hetherington, Aaron Abercrombie, Drift SK8er, Akano Himajima, Corey Tokars, Quan Yen Thompson, Yan, Devin Black, Dasher Games, Joe Bros, Ray Von Crimson River, Dante Allister, Adam Yonkers, Blood Saints, Donna Cafe, Zeph, KC, Howie 60, Ignacio, Carlos Terry. Hope of the Universe, the Ultimate Guardians, celestial tier supporters whose impact literally shines across the galaxy. Narole Uzumaki Uchiha, Keyshawn, Tayshawn Palmer, Coldbane 4, The Maniac 563, Debs, LS Morningstar, Marl, Spintown, X-Shoot50, Greg Green, James, Juan, Zeno KJ. Thanks for watching. If this movie blew your mind, hit subscribe for more insane stories, broken legends, and anime chaos that goes way too hard. Drop a like, tell me your favorite moment, and stick around because the next one might be even crazier.